Yes.
The lead Spring Army sends its regards.
Hello, everyone. I'm the Enforcer, and I'm accompanied by Enforcer Matt.
And good evening, folks. It's Enforcer Matt, and welcome back to day 1243 of the War News stream. Today, we've seen massive attacks being launched on Moscow by Ukrainian drones. We've also heard U.S. officials order citizens to leave Syria immediately, and also Germany is warning of a major imminent Russian attack on Ukraine coming up very soon. It's good to see you all once again.
And, of course, we're going to be covering the past 24 hours of news from around the world, as we've been able to hear significant developments inside the Russian Federation, the Middle East, the state of Ukraine, and also Central Asia and Eastern Europe as a whole. We have been able to hear over the past 24 hours that Ukrainian armed forces were able to conduct another drone attack against the capital city of Moscow, and also were able to hit a railhead south of the city of Shakhty in the Rostov-on-Don Oblast region. We have been able to hear that significant damage was dealt to the train station south of Shakhty, and we also were able to hear that some damage was caused to cities high-rises in Zelenograd due to Russian air defense missiles going errant and slamming into the buildings after failed air defense interceptions. We have also been able to hear inside of the Middle East a myriad of different reports, as some reports have stated that the Syrian interim government was able to intervene and stop the fighting, while others are saying that the Syrian interim government is now involved in the fighting and directly fighting on the ground against the Druze and the Syrian Tribal armies at the same time. Generally, our video and picture evidence is showing the latter, that it appears to be that the fighting has not stopped and the fighting is still continuing at this point, although the Syrian interim government is claiming otherwise. We have also been able to hear that the United States of America has condemned the state of Israel in their attacks against the Syrian interim government and the Syrian Tribal armies, as it's further destabilizing the situation inside of Syria, while at the same time also stating that they are looking into further routes and options to be able to provide and arm the state of Ukraine to an even greater degree than has been seen so far in the past. The Federal Republic of Germany has also begun to explore the option of purchasing nearly $5 billion worth of surface-to-air missile defense systems, the Patriots in particular, to be able to provide the state of Ukraine with in the future. Meanwhile, the rift between the Russian Federation and Azerbaijan is continuing to grow deeper as the president of Azerbaijan has started to level more criticisms against the Russian Federation over the course of the day. Meanwhile, Ukrainian armed forces have been able to hold their front lines today to a significant degree and have been able to inflict a considerable amount of damage on Russian armed forces, continuing to push them back and also hold their lines wherever Russian offensives are currently ongoing at this point. We have quite a significant amount of news to be covering here over just the past 24 hours alone, and I also want to make it a little bit clear that tonight is the Sunday night fundraiser night, and we are running a fundraiser for none other than Nova Ukraine, an amazing nonprofit. But getting us on into the major news of the day, we have been able to hear the Ukrainian armed forces were able to conduct another significant drone attack against the Moscow air defense perimeter, or at least the Moscow air defense semicircle to the southeastern side of the city of Moscow. We were able to get video and picture evidence showing us the drones that were flying over the area, and also explosions of air defense and also direct impacts that were recorded around the surrounding area. And here is some of that footage. We can see the light explosion happening over the horizon there. And also the explosion as well, once again confirming some sort of an air defense interception or a drone hitting its target. We also have an additional clip right here. We hear the drone faintly in the distance as it's flying through the area on the very western outskirts of Moscow at this point. And that's the end of that clip, but still letting us see a little bit of the drone attacks as they were unfolding today. Meanwhile, further north towards the area of Zelenograd, we were also able to get more video and picture evidence of the ongoing drone attacks that were occurring within this area. And here's the clip. And we can actually see it right there. The lightning illuminated the Liudi for just a little moment right there. And we can see it. There it is. It's another Liudi long-range drone. This is literally coming on the cusp of the attacks that we saw occurring just yesterday and the day before, making it appear that the Ukrainian attacks are being conducted endlessly at this point, every single 24-hour cycle.
That's a hell of a backdrop with the lightning, too. Very fitting and spooky.
Ooh, we're going to blow up your stuff. Ooh, like it's man. The Russians, meanwhile, speak of many things. What they're having for dinner, what the air defense doing, many, many important things.
Cloudy thunderstorming with a chance of explosions.
Russian weather reports have never been so optimistic. And we can see some sort of a flash in the distance there, possibly lightning again.
Взяли, нет, не взяли, полетел, слушай. Они, мне кажется...
And that's the end of that clip. However, we were able to confirm that the Russian air defense around this area did not go peachy, to put it that way, as we were able to confirm that at least within the area of Zelenograd, it appears that a Russian air defense missile went errant and actually ended up running into a high-rise building, causing significant damage, at least to a small area on one of the sides. And we can see that in this clip right here. Oh, there it was. You'd actually, let me rewind that really quickly and show that to you all again. You can actually see that. Right there, right where the mouse cursor was at. The missile actually impacted the side of the building. It is an occupied apartment building and ended up exploding when it made contact with the glass. From what we understand, there were injured civilians from this hit, but it appears to be one that the Russian air defense was not able to necessarily avoid, as, of course, while the Russians are wildly incompetent in almost every single way, errant missiles in the air defense setting is a fairly normal sort of an occurrence, and we've actually seen this thing happening a decent amount of times, actually inside the state of Ukraine in cities like Kyiv and others, when air defense missiles either miss their target or they go haywire or errant. You can't hear the explosion. They're actually recorded by the camera. And moving on from that and into our next clip, we can also see another clip from inside of Zelenograd. That actually... That actually is another errant air defense missile hit. And another one. I'm not really sure if that was an air defense missile that went errant or haywire. That actually sounded like a far larger explosion.
В дом попали.
Yeah, we see it.
She's like, oh my god, right there. It's like, yeah, we can tell. And moving on from that clip and on into our next one, here's a actual video of the apartment building that was directly hit by the errant air defense missile.
Do you think it was a targeted hit? Like they were actually trying to go for a specific person with that? Because it seems oddly specific.
No, because it was an errant air defense missile, meaning the Russians fired an air defense missile, it missed, or it went haywire and it just ended up running into the building. So not really a directed hit of any kind. This is more so of an accidental sort of a thing. But we can also see that in this clip right here as well.
Двоих сбили над нами.
What the hell was that at the end of the clip?
That was the insanity finally setting in, I think.
Bro, this guy said, yo, this B is empty. Oh, like, bro.
Двоих сбили над нами.
Honestly, that guy might have lost his composure slightly at the end of this clip. Let's listen to that one more time just to make sure.
Сбили над нами.
That's crazy.
I'm not really sure what to make of that, to be entirely honest with y'all. That guy actually has I don't know if that was a laugh. It actually sounded like he might have been imitating Tucker Carlson there for a minute. But beyond that, I don't know what that was, but we were able to confirm the explosions once again in that clip. Nevertheless, that was really the only damage we could independently verify around the Zelenograd area, but as a result of this, we were able to hear that the airport inside of the northern region of Moscow, the Sheremetyevo airport, which, let me go get the full name for y'all. It's a very lengthy name, and it's one that's a little bit more difficult to pronounce. The Moscow Sheremetyevo Alexander S. Pushkin International Airport. Could they make the name any longer? The answer is no. But this is the airport that was actually shut down. In case y'all don't know this either, there are several major international airports surrounding the city of Moscow, most of them found on the northern, southern, and eastern sides of the city. The Sheremetyevo airport is actually the largest and most heavily used airport within the surrounding Moscow area, but the Domodedovo International Airport of the Dimigon Airport is also another significantly used international airport. There also are some smaller airports that are least used, like the Zhukovsky International Airport, as well as to the direct north, the Russians, I forgot what the name of this facility technically is. It's kind of, it's really more so of like a halfway deal. It is used by some private flights, but it also is used by the Russian armed forces themselves as well. But a large amount of the Russians' governmental aircraft are actually based here at this airfield within the eastern area of Moscow. Near to the area of Shilkovo, which I believe that's called the Shilkovo Air Base, if I'm not mistaken. Nevertheless, we were able to hear that the Sheremetyevo airport was closed as a result of the air attack, once again showing us that a lot of the drones were actually trying to skirt around the northern part of the semicircular defense outside of Moscow at Zelenograd. But we were able to see the videos of the confirmation of the airport closures, or at least flight closures, in the meantime in this clip right here.
That looks like absolute hell right there. Too crowded.
Far too crowded.
We know this is not normal air traffic because the Russians can't afford to fly like this.
No, they can't. Like, this is probably like the top 1% of the Russians that are currently being stopped from traveling around the country. And you know, folks, it is a little bit bizarre that the Russian Federation, once again, according to their own statements, the mightiest and greatest army on the planet, even still to this day, are so mighty and invincible that airports have to get shut down due to, and I quote, air raid attacks. It's a little bit interesting that they have to do something like that, considering that, according to the Russians, they're the greatest and strongest army on Earth, but it makes it incredibly clear that, once again, the Russians are under another significant drone attack within the area of the city of Moscow. Outside of that, we also were able to hear of a significant attack that occurred south of Shakhty, the city of Shakhty within the Rostov Oblast, as we were able to see that within this little town right here of, and let me make sure I get the name correct, it's this town, this one, right here. There is a train station right here, this building, that was directly attacked by the Ukrainians overnight. As to the purpose of directly attacking the building itself, I do not know. But here's the direct aftermath of the impact on the building. It's like a little fireworks show. And of course, someone's always flooring it in every single clip in Russia. I don't know what it is with that, but look at this Lada, man. This guy is flooring it, and it's going like from 35 to 40, maybe, over the course of the whole time we saw in the clip.
You saw those like old school, old fashioned headlights turn on. Those things were like those old, like, I forgot even the name of the bulbs. They're like halogen bulbs or something. Yeah, I think, no, not fluorescent. I think they're halogen, but those old style ones that just like never give out.
Man, honestly. And this guy's like, look, the station is on fire, on God. And also, for some reason, it sounded like at the end of the clip, the guy might have been trying to goose his car into the cameraman, like he was like revving it a little bit at the guy. But moving on from that, we also were able to see the damage to the station later on as well, as a train passed through.
Oh wow, they really got that good. Blew the whole roof off.
I guess you could say they blew the lid off. Also, by the way, if you didn't know, that's actually a Russian firefighting train. Do those exist anywhere else in the world? Not really, but do they exist in Russia? Yeah. A little bit weird that they would bring in a firefighting train instead of a firefighting team from the nearby town, but beyond that, they did eventually put the fire out, but not after the building was pretty much completely burned through. It is showing us once again that the Ukrainian armed forces are starting to hit a significant amount of targets, at least within the area, and are continuing to try and hit key Russian logistical structures that may be able to help the Russian Federation to continue on their war effort at all costs. It does appear that at the moment, a lot of people are talking about these major drone attacks that are being conducted against Moscow and throughout the entirety of the Russian Federation. And a lot of people are wondering, is this the most effective way to end the war? Yes, maybe, no, maybe not, maybe possibly, maybe so, maybe really, maybe not. Matthew, what are people thinking about this, and what are you thinking about it as well?
All right, so now we've seen today the continuation of major drone attacks by Ukraine on Moscow, which is, of course, the capital of Russia, and we've seen this over the course of several weeks, and it seems like it's becoming a daily occurrence at this point that Moscow is getting attacked. So the question is this the most effective way for Ukraine to end the war? And 51% said yes, it is the most effective way, while 21% said no, other targets are more crucial, and 18% said I'm really 50-50 on this question. And in my opinion, it really depends on which way Ukraine's truly trying to end the war, because there's two different methods they can try to use here rather than trying to win on the front line. One is they can try to destroy as many of these economic targets as they possibly can, meaning oil refineries, oil depots, fuel depots, and things like that. That causes a real economic impact on the Russian economy, which will further worsen the economic state inside of Russia, which will thus bring the economy to a halt and could stop the war. The other alternative is they can make it so miserable to live in Russia, like, for example, the airports start piling up like they are right now, that eventually the civilians get tired of it and they start asking Putin questions about why are we being harassed by Ukraine daily and how come you're not doing anything about it? So I think right now, Ukraine is kind of trying to do both approaches, but I think they really ought to focus on the economic approach. That would be the much more effective way to end this war really quick, would be taking down the economic aspects, which means hitting more refineries specifically. I'm with the 18%. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say that I'm with the 21%. I would actually say that at least at this moment, other targets may be a little bit more crucial to attack than Moscow. From what we've been seeing so far, a lot of these Ukrainian drone attacks do not have a high efficiency rate with making it through the Moscow air defense perimeter, including the attack that we're talking about tonight right now. While a decent amount of drones were fired into the area of the Moscow air defense perimeter, from what we understand, about 90% of them or more were intercepted and shot down by Russian air defense, because we have not been able to confirm a single impact over yesterday's attack or today's attack within the Moscow air defense perimeter. With this in mind, it is showing that while Moscow is an incredibly significant and important military and industrial target to be able to hit and try and cause damage to, there are other less defended extremities of the Russian war and economic machines that could could be targeted and destroyed along the Volga River basin, or really the Volga River as a whole, within the entirety of Western Russia, and generally along those lines entirely. There is practically no air defense in the Russian Federation outside the city of Moscow, meaning that you are able to easily hit and destroy an oil refinery or a major factory anywhere outside of Moscow pretty much unimpeded. However, trying to attack one in Moscow is incredibly challenging, if not next to near impossible, because the city is so well defended by air defense, at least at the moment. I believe that it's going to take something a little bit stronger, at least in my opinion, than the Ukrainian drones that we're seeing right now to be able to actually cause significant damage to Moscow's military sites and economic sites of any important note. We'll most likely have to see that some sort of American weaponry or Western weaponry is provided and permissions are allowed for those weapons to be used on Moscow to actually cause any severe damage or to be able to circumvent the air defense perimeter itself. Another important thing to note is that the Ukrainians still are not targeting the flak towers around the city at the moment and are pretty much leaving those to survive and to continue to function and operate, which is also causing even more significant issues because with the existence and continued functioning of those air defense towers, the city of Moscow's airspace is pretty much shut down entirely to Ukrainian drone attacks unless they're attempting to hit somewhere within the northeastern region around the Shilkovo airport or the town of Pushkino. Those are the only areas that we've seen the Ukrainian drone attacks have had any chance of success, and those drones have pretty much had to circumvent the Moscow air defense perimeter entirely and come in on their attacks from a northeasterly direction. So with that, I hope that does address that the best I can, at least in my opinion, because I generally do believe that the drones and the munitions could be better used elsewhere and cause far more damage anywhere else rather than Moscow, at least for now. But with that, I hope that does address that the best I can, at least in my opinion. And we have also been able to hear, speaking of these significant attacks inside of the Russian Federation, that there has been some significant attacks that have been going on inside of the Syrian interim government, or really throughout the entirety of Syria. We're just going to simplify it and call it Syria, because I don't really think the Syrian interim government is the official successor state of Syria any longer, if there even was such a concept in the first place. Moving us on down into this area, however, it is incredibly clear that the situation is not improving, at least in the Middle East at the moment. It is actually continuing to deteriorate to a worse and worse level. Also, really quickly, folks, I've got to say, I do not know how super chats are coming in tonight because at least on my end, there is no way for. Let me refresh this. By the way, let me check this really quickly because I want to make sure that I'm saying this correctly. Yeah, there doesn't really appear to be a way. Let me show you all this really quickly because at least on my end with the live stream, because I have one up to check how much is being raised for the fundraiser, I don't have a way to throw in a super chat. Down here it says donate, and I can donate to the fundraiser that we have for Nova Ukraine, but there is no option to actually super chat. I don't know how people are doing that tonight. I do thank y'all for the support, though, and helping this channel to keep running, but I do want to make it clear, folks, that tonight is a Sunday night fundraiser night, and we would like for people to support the fundraiser and help out with supporting Western American interests, because I don't know how people are super chatting. I still thank y'all greatly for that, but at the same time, it's a bit of a mystery, because I can't tell if YouTube is having some sort of a glitch or an error or some sort of an issue, because technically...
Oh, I see how they're doing it. So if you go, and I think this might be a glitch that YouTube hasn't figured out yet either. If you click the crown on the top fans of the channel in the live chat, you'll see at the very bottom there's a buy a super chat button down there that should be deactivated when a fundraiser is running. So I think that actually might be a glitch that YouTube's not discovered with this new system they've implemented.
I'm not seeing a buy a super chat option actually.
It's down there. I'm seeing it.
I'm not at the moment on my end. I'm sure you're seeing my
Go
screen.
all the way to the bottom?
We're all the way at the bottom.
Yes, it's there. It's just not on your screen.
Oh, well, it's not there. It's not, at least for me, it's not there. Like, you're like, it's there. I'm like, oh, no, I'm seeing an up arrow, and it brings me back up to the top, but that's it. But beyond that, at least at the moment, I don't know what's going on with the whole super chat side of things. It's really bizarre because we never get super chats on Sundays, and we're not supposed to. But beyond that, I hope we address that well, just in case a lot of y'all are wondering how's that even happening or how's that even working. I really don't even know either. But apparently, it might be a top fan sort of an issue where there's a bit of a loophole. And actually, Actually, it appears that there is a loophole. You're actually right, apparently, Matthew. It's not on my end. It doesn't exist for me on my computer, but apparently people actually can super chat tonight. So that's a little bit weird.
Interesting.
I don't know how.
What do you know? We're the first people to discover that glitch because I've never heard anybody else mention that anywhere across YouTube. So YouTube, hello. There's a little bit of a glitch with the programming. There's a super chat button when there shouldn't be. Just a big heads up.
Yeah, it looks like everyone actually does have access to a super chat button through the top fans. I do thank everyone for the support and helping the channel to keep on running, but I would love for people to focus on the fundraiser tonight and help support Western and American interests around the globe through the amazing fundraiser that we're running tonight for Nova Ukraine. But moving on from that and on into our Middle East news, I want to make sure to get y'all a statement really quickly from the U.S. ambassador to Syria, which is Ambassador Tom Barak. Let me make sure to read this off to y'all because this is the current U.S. stance on the situation inside of Syria. The president's decision to lift sanctions was a principled step, offering the Syrian people a chance to move beyond years of unimaginable suffering and atrocities. The international community has largely rallied behind the nascent Syrian government, watching with cautious optimism as it seeks to transition from a legacy of pain to a future of hope. Yet this fragile ambition is now overshadowed by profound shock as brutal acts by warring factions on the ground undermine the government's authority and disrupt any semblance of order. All factions must immediately lay down their arms, cease hostilities, and abandon cycles of tribal vengeance. Syria stands at a critical juncture between a peace and dialogue must prevail, and prevail now. This position is incredibly bizarre because if y'all have been following the situation like we have been, this is a complete misrepresentation of the situation inside of Syria and what has been going on for quite an incredibly long time, at least over the past several months, since the collapse of the Syrian interim government. Also, really quickly, folks, I also have to make this clear as well, that if you send in a super chat, that support is not going to the fundraiser. The super chats are to support the channel. So donations to the fundraiser support the fundraiser. And to quickly explain why that's the case, it's supposed to be made that way. This loophole is not supposed to exist because the channel works off of a concept that your money is supposed to be clearly denoted to where it's going. Every Sunday, you're supposed to be guaranteed through the fundraiser donations that your money is going into a fundraiser to go help out these nonprofits that are doing great work overseas. With the super chats, however, it's supposed to be clearly pretty much earmarked or noted that that support is going towards the channel and helping us to keep this thing running. So if you're throwing in a super chat tonight, it is not going to support the nonprofit. We generally would like to request that everyone does throw in their support tonight to the nonprofit through our fundraiser instead of to us to a super chat, because we run these streams every single Sunday to make sure to support and fundraise for nonprofits that are doing great work around the world, helping to save lives and improve the lives of the people that we cover the news on every single week. I just want to make that a little bit clear, because if you're throwing in like a super chat and you're asking, does this go to Ukraine? The answer is no, and we also can't refund super chats, so it ends up going to us, and we really don't have a choice. Also, another thing I have to add in is that you can't throw in a super chat and then tell us to go and donate it to the fundraiser, because to explain a little bit as to why we couldn't, YouTube takes 30% of every super chat. So if we take your whole super chat, like let's say for example with the Martian is $100, if we take that super chat and then we take all of them together, which right now it's $205 of them, and we took all of them and we threw them into the fundraiser, we're actually losing about $70 at that point that YouTube's taken out of those super chats that we're never going to get. Meaning that if people start to throw in thousands of dollars of super chats, we're going to be out of thousands of dollars out of pocket by the end of the night because YouTube's taking 30% of them that we're not getting, but we're still obligated to throw in y'all's 100% to the fundraiser if we did it that way. So super chats are directly to support the channel, and we generally we highly encourage y'all tonight, although there now is apparently a loophole where you can get around that, we would highly encourage y'all to support the fundraisers through the donate button, which has a little like a heart-shaped handshake button, to support the fundraiser, because we run these streams without the concept of getting paid these nights and days to make sure that we support the folks that we're talking about around the world. So I hope that addresses that well for everyone here really quickly, because if you do throw in a super chat, we can't stop y'all from throwing in a super chat, but if y'all do throw in a super chat, I want to make it incredibly clear that not a dime or a cent of that is going to this nonprofit to help support folks in Ukraine. Every single 100% of the donations that you're giving through the donate button are going to help out Ukraine, but the super chats don't. So I just want to make that incredibly clear for folks tonight to clear up any confusion, because we've never had a situation with this, with a loophole like this, that YouTube hasn't patched out, because technically tonight, by our normal definition, you should never be able to throw in a super chat. And now we're having to deal with everyone can throw in a super chat if they want to, and donate if they want to as well, which is a really weird thing. We've never had to deal with this before. So with that, I hope that does address that well. But getting back into our news here really quickly, and speaking about what we're hearing from the ambassador, let me break this down really quickly, and let me say that the ambassador is speaking from a disillusioned or a completely misinformed sort of a position, at least at the moment. So really quickly, the president is offering to lift sanctions, which is claimed to be a principled step. We're not going to be making a comment on some sort of a decision that the president is making. But beyond that, the additional statement was saying offering the Syrian people a chance to move forward beyond years of unimaginable suffering and atrocities, which is a great thing in concept. However, the international community has largely rallied behind the nascent Syrian government, watching with cautious optimism as it seeks the transition from a legacy of pain to a future of hope. That is something that generally is true. A lot of people are giving a decent amount of deference at the moment to what's going on inside of the Syrian interim government, but the problem is the next statements that come afterwards are clearly showing that there is some sort of a misinformed position that the ambassador is working off of, or this is some sort of a misinformed stance or a point. Yet, this fragile ambition is now overshadowed by profound shock as brutal acts by warring factions on the ground undermine the government's authority and disrupt any semblance of order. The issue is that one of these warring factions is the Syrian interim government itself. The Syrian interim government has gone out of its way to engage in armed conflict with the Syrian Democratic Forces of the north. They have gone out of their way to conduct atrocities on the Alawite Arabs of the western Syrian coastline, and just recently, they ended up managing a massacre where several hundred men, women, and children inside of the As Suwayda Central Hospital were massacred directly under the command of Syrian interim government forces. It is incredibly clear that if any blame for the destabilizing and hostile situation inside of Syria was to go to anyone, a large amount of that blame is to be shouldered directly on the Syrian interim government itself. Saying shame on these factions for rising up and rebelling against the Syrian interim government isn't really doing much, because we cannot control any sort of an uprising or rebellion factions in the region, but the Syrian interim government can certainly manage and control its own responses to the situation, which so far its responses have been directly parallel to war crimes and crimes against humanity and every single situation that they've been involved in so far. This sort of a situation here is one that I would have to say is very misinformed or misstated by the ambassador. I do not know if this is a position that's supposed to be supported directly by the President of the United States and the ambassador is just echoing those sorts of statements, or whether this is something that the ambassador is actually saying himself. But if the ambassador is saying this on his own personal position or for the president or whoever, this is a completely misinformed understanding of the situation that's happening on the ground inside of Syria right now. According to the ambassador, he also stated that all factions must immediately lay down their arms, cease hostilities, and abandon cycles of tribal vengeance. But this is also, once again, not factoring in the situation that's going on the ground. The Syrian interim government is led entirely by Sunni Arabs that make up the majority of the population inside of Syria. These Sunni Arabs have made it incredibly clear that they are a successor faction to Al-Qaeda and carry on a lot of the radical sorts of Sunni Arabic concepts that came out of Al-Qaeda that they're still continuing to push forward. This means that they're openly discriminating against the minority populations and cultures of the country, including the Alawite Arabs, the Kurds of the north, and the Druze in the south. They're pretty much discriminating against literally anyone and everyone that is not a Sunni Arab. And this is causing a great deal of discontent inside of the country, as all of these groups are seeing that there is no way forward to an equal and opportunistic future with the Sunni Arabs. There is only a future of future discrimination and poor treatment under a new Sunni Arab government that may as well be identical to that of Bashar al-Assad's dying and ailing regime within its final years, or really for the entire decades that it existed. It wasn't in charge of the Syrian Arab Republic. This is something that is making the position from the United States seem very disconnected from the situation on the ground, and it is not going to be resulting in a positive sort of an outcome inside of Syria at any point in the future. To really quickly explain why I'm having an issue with this, I do not have an issue at all with anyone on a domestic level, especially when it comes to foreign policy. But one thing I do have an issue with is when U.S. administrations try and come up with this concept of peace in the Middle East, and instead of actually trying to understand and really read the situation that's coming out of the Middle East and figure out a way to try and make it work, we generally force some sort of a poor sort of a concept due to a complete misunderstanding of the situation into the region, which is guaranteed to create more strife and fighting. With the actions made today, or the statements made today by the ambassador Tom Barak, there is a very high chance that we could start to radicalize Alawite, Druze, and Kurdish factions inside of Syria at this moment against the U.S. government, because the U.S. government is openly coming in and saying, we have absolutely no understanding of the situation going on in Syria right now. We do not know who is really conducting the massacres, although it's clearly al-Jilani's men, but we're going to tell all of the people who are trying to defend themselves against al-Jilani to lay down their arms and let the massacres and the crimes against humanity continue, because clearly the people who are trying to defend themselves against this radical al-Jilani government are the ones at fault. This is going to create radicals out of our allies, and we're going to be creating radicals out of our allies to help prop up a radical that's already in power at this moment. We're pretty
Well,
much...
actually, I think the messaging is a little bit inconsistent because the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, put out a tweet yesterday evening, I think, or maybe yesterday morning, basically saying that he recognizes the fact that the Druze people are being harassed. But the catch was he didn't blame it on the Jelani regime, which right now the U.S. is trying to have relations with. He blamed it on the Syrian Tribal forces and the quote-unquote rebels that were harassing and also attacking the Druze. So there's obviously a massive push by the United States trying to, I guess you could say, normalize the Jelani regime, or at least have normal relations with them. But I think it's going to be impossible to do that because you really can't have relations with a regime that operates like a terrorist force. You can't do that. It's going to lead to nothing good, and it's also going to obviously send the wrong message to those in the region. So I don't know. Like, in my opinion, the U.S. ought to really back off Jelani dramatically and quickly because he's shown that he's not reliable. He has really bad tendencies, and he's pretty much going right back to his roots, which was, fighting in very bad organizations. So I don't know. They ought to back off.
I would say that the United States needs to completely reassess its situation or stance inside of Syria and needs to start approaching this from a different perspective. Because right now, we're not going to be seeing any sort of a positive outcome from the current foreign policy perspective in Syria. It is completely misunderstanding the situation, and not only that, it's going to be further exacerbating the violence that we see in this area. If people want to, here's the issue, folks, that I'm seeing right now. There is a chance at the moment that we could actually stop a good amount of the conflicts and fighting that's going on in Syria. It wouldn't be permanent, of course, but at least it would be some sort of a decent length of lasting peace in the region. The problem, however, is that we're coming in and we're going, instead of actually fixing all of the underlying issues again, the U.S. answer is to just say, okay, everyone, let's all kith and get along. And no one's going to be kithing and nobody's going to be getting along inside of Syria, because the fact of the matter is that the Sunni Arabs, as long as they are in control of the country, it's becoming incredibly clear at this point that they are going to be continuing atrocities against these minority groups inside of the region. And not only that, they are going to be pushing forward further discrimination and persecutions of these peoples, which will lead them to rise up once again in violent conflict and continue to embroil the entirety of Syria in a never-ending war with one group or the other. If it's not the Kurds, it's the Druze. If it's not the Druze, it's the Alawites. If it's not the Alawites, it's the other two combined. It's going to keep on going until the end of time. There has to be some sort of an approach or a solution that is made to where Syria is some sort of a loose confederation of independent states or something along those lines, so that way the actual individual customs and cultures of these groups don't intersect on each other, or that one majority group like the Sunni Arabs can curb stomp the Alawite Arabs, the Druze, and the Kurds combined. Something like that has to happen, because if that does not happen, we're going to see that these sorts of conflicts that continue to destabilize Syria are going to keep happening in the future. And just because... Go ahead.
And also, what's up with the U.S. trying to come in and start harassing Israel over going in and trying to protect the Druze? The U.S. is clearly not willing to help because the U.S. is trying to play this diplomacy game with the new Jelani regime to have relations with them. So the U.S. wants to act like they're turning a blind eye to it. But at the same time, though, Marco Rubio will kind of somewhat acknowledge the fact that the Druze are being attacked and basically genocided in southern Syria. But meanwhile, when Israel tries to come in and perform airstrikes to once again ward off these Syrian rebels trying to attack the Druze people, the U.S. wants to start saying that Netanyahu's a madman. It's like he's not a madman if he's acting in defense of the people that are aligned with Israel. It's not like these airstrikes that Israel's conducting is just random. They're for a reason. They're to protect them against the Syrian forces in southern Syria.
That's exactly right. Generally, I would actually say, folks, because I see some people saying there's no way to fix it. There is a way to fix it. It's just that no one's ever really understood how to fix it, and I'll generally give at least a concept of a way that we could start to try and fix this. The Syrian Republic, as it exists right now, needs to be divided up into a confederation. It does not need to be a republic government system. It needs to be some sort of a confederation. And to explain really quickly how a confederation works, because I know a lot of people are probably thinking about the Confederacy in the United States, is that a confederacy is not, the Confederacy as in the United States in the Civil War. A confederacy is a specific form of government that generally allows for most of the power to be seen within individual states of the country, more so than some sort of a centralized federal form of a government. This would most likely be incredibly beneficial in Syria, as we could see that this confederation system, while incredibly weak from a foreign policy perspective or power projection ability, would actually allow or at least maintain some sort of autonomy for the different cultural groups inside of Syria, allowing for the Alawite Arabs to pretty much practice their own customs and laws within their West Coast state. The Kurds would be able to be allowed to operate under their own customs and laws within the northeastern region of the country, and the Druze would also be ordered the same respects and laws as well, including those of the Sunni Arabs. It would generally at least strike some sort of a balance where one group is not able to discriminate or completely beat down the other cultural groups inside of the country, while also keeping them under the same umbrella as largely remaining a unified Syria on paper. That probably is going to be one of the best things that we could see at this point, because beyond that, just the idea of telling everyone to lay down their arms and trust the Al-Qaeda successors in running the country when they clearly are already making it quite evident that they're very radical is an incredibly bad idea, and is one that is going to be doomed to failure here within the next few years. If you don't believe me, just look at our analysis on the prior ceasefires, the endless amount of them that have been negotiated inside of Syria, and we've always said they're on a house of cards and they're bound to fail within days or hours, and we were always right. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to look at these sorts of approaches and say these are absolutely half-assed, half-brained, half-baked approaches that we're taking right now in Syria. And if we actually want to be proud of some sort of a lasting peace in the region, we have to actually put in the brain power, or at least get the brain firing enough to understand that it's not as simple as telling everyone to put down their guns and get along, because there's a lot more complicated things going on in Syria than that kind of a concept at the moment. But nevertheless, a lot of people have been putting in their opinions on Syria and what's been going on with the U.S. position on Syria right now. And Matthew, what are people thinking about this, and what are you thinking about it as well?
Okay, so one thing that we're getting word about is apparently the U.S. ambassador to the region. I think it was Syria, maybe. I'm not really sure. It was the Tom Barak fellow. Which one's he ambassador to? I can't even keep it straight.
He's ambassador to Syria and I think Turkey simultaneously.
Okay, so he is the one. He's the ambassador to Syria. So we heard that U.S. officials today hinted that sanctions may be reapplied to Syria's regime if it does not stop its really bad activities in southern Syria. And what are your thoughts? So 53% said we should reapply Syria sanctions now, while 26% said it really depends on Syria's future actions, and 11% said do not reapply sanctions to Syria because we should normalize relations. And on this one, I'm pretty strong on backing off the Jelani regime. Initially, I thought maybe he would go pro-Western. Me and the enforcer thought that. But it turns out on that one, we were pretty bad wrong. I'll admit that right up front. That was a wrong conclusion to make. He's proven us very wrong, and he's proven that he's resorting right back to the very bad methods, if not worse, than what al-Assad did before he got ousted as the leader of Syria. So, in my opinion, he's actually becoming worse than al-Assad, at least in my opinion. So, I think reapplying sanctions to Syria is a necessity to send a message that we are not supporting the Jelani regime in the West, and the U.S. is taking a stance against him because clearly he's not in control of the country, or at least he wants to pretend like he's not, while his men conduct atrocities. So I'm with the 53%. Put the sanctions now and get that thing over with. But Enforcer, what say you?
I'll just be honest with y'all. At least in our prior assessment of saying that we ought to back off and the Israelis ought to be backing off and giving the Syrian interim government a little bit of breathing room to see what they were going to be turning into was a very good idea, because we did need to have a little bit of a moment to see what they were going to become. Now that we know that they were going to become a radical, what could be described as an extremist Islamic government, now we can clearly start to operate against them. But the issue is that, at least with how it's supposed to work on a diplomatic level, when a new government comes into power, we generally are supposed to back off and give them a little bit, a couple of months, maybe at the longest, to figure out what they are or what they're turning into, and see what's going to come of them, because they could end up being incredibly good, and we could end up becoming an ally with them, or they can end up becoming incredibly horrific, like this government has, and then we have to start acting against them. But we have to give them a couple of months of a clear window, so we can just sit there and watch them pretty much in a cage and see what they're going to grow up into. And it appears that the Jelani government has grown up into being exactly what we thought it would be, which is some sort of a radical Islamic faction. We generally didn't believe that in the onset. We did know that they were a successor group of Al-Qaeda, but considering that they had rebranded themselves greatly, we were thinking maybe, just maybe, there's a chance that they might not be as extreme, or they might not be at extreme at all anymore as Al-Qaeda was, but they clearly are. So I would say that the Israeli actions that are being taken in Syria are absolutely appropriate at the moment, and I'd also say that the United States position against the HTS should be openly unfriendly at this point. They're clearly not our friends, because I don't know if people remember this, but Al-Qaeda seems to have this thing of wanting to attack the United States and go out of its way to do that. So considering that this is a successor faction of Al-Qaeda inside of Syria that's now taken over the government, does it really seem like it's a good idea that we're going to team up with a terrorist group that literally was born out of the terrorist group that conducted 9/11? It doesn't seem like a good idea to me. It seems like these people, at least at this point with how they're treating the Syrians inside of Syria, are about as radical, if not even more radical, than Al-Qaeda was. This is a terrible idea to try and become friends with these people, because we're pretty much giving them an open room to start supporting and sponsoring further extremists inside of Syria. It's quite clear they have no issue with what the Syrian Tribal army is doing to the Druze right now, and if they have no problem with the senseless slaughter going on inside of As Suwayda right now, and they also directly brought it on in the first place by conducting the massacre at the As Suwayda hospital that killed hundreds, why in the world would we ever think that they would not have any scruples in attacking the United States in the future through some sort of an asymmetrical terrorist attack like we saw in the past through Al-Qaeda? It makes no sense to assume otherwise than that. That's the only sort of a logical assumption we can make about this group of people. So with that in mind,
I have no idea. I have no idea why the U.S. wants to really buddy up with Jelani so badly. Because what do we really gain from buddying up with him? I guess we have the chance to influence him a bit to hopefully stop weapon shipments from Iran over to Lebanon. I guess that might be a part of it. But at the same time, though, it's not like we're gaining anything massively economically, or at least in my opinion, from teaming up with the new Syrian government. I just don't really see an advantage to it. I think initially the goal was, let's try to keep Russia out. And if we can fill that void now that Russia has become unfriendly, or the Jelani regime was somewhat unfriendly in the beginning with Russia, then maybe the U.S. can fill that relationship. But it's not really working out that way. So why keep pursuing the relationship when it's pretty much a dead end?
Exactly. I don't really know why. It makes no sense at all from a foreign policy perspective. And I would honestly say to y'all, if the way that things have been gone about here were ass backwards in some ways by some groups. Like, for example, Israel's option of bombing the Syrians from day one as soon as the new government took over was absolutely harebrained. It made no sense, in my opinion, because we didn't even know what kind of a government they really were going to be yet once they actually got in power. Then we saw months later, now in the present day, that they are clearly some sort of a radical Islamic extremist group that's taken over the country, which is something that we certainly do not want to be seeing that's in control of Syria for long. And now that we're seeing that, the Israelis are bombing them again, which is fine now. Now it makes a great deal of sense. And now the U.S. is telling them to back off and not attack what's clearly some sort of a terrorist faction. I'm not really understanding the premise here or the logic behind it. It literally went the opposite direction than what we should have been doing the entire time, which was hold off at the beginning and then go at them here right now. Instead, we said, you can go at them right now. We don't really care. And now that we're seeing that they're clearly radical Islamic extremists, now we're going, okay, now let's back off of them. Now that they're clearly a despotic sort of a government. It's making no sense to me at all. But I would have to say that the United States should reapply the sanctions, and I think that the HTS, as well as the Syrian interim government, should now be put back on the terrorist registry. Now it's becoming incredibly clear what they are and what they're doing. But with that, we are going to be moving y'all down into As Suwayda, because we were able to hear that earlier in the day, the Syrian interim government has declared great success. As the Syrian information minister to Sky News Arabia said, the Ministry of the Interior succeeded in separating the conflicting forces in As Suwayda. Let's see how that went. It doesn't look
It's
like
all under control, folks. Don't worry at all. They've got it perfectly under control. The police showed up and the police got it under control, and it looks like it's ass backwards.
It doesn't really look like they stopped the fighting to me. We were able to see that some areas of the city, the fighting appears to have stopped temporarily, but in others there was still a significant amount of fighting, at least from what we were able to see about 9 and 8 hours ago, which came 3 hours after they stated that the Syrian Ministry of the Interior was able to manage the situation and stop all of the fighting.
دوار العمران اليوم 20/7/2025 حياك السويدة وضع مأساوي اليوم 20/7/2025 حياك 20/7/2025 السويدة منكوبة بيوت محروقة جثث بالطرقات.
The neighborhood ride out right there on the truck.
Man, the neighborhood watch with a shield made of cardboard for their NSV machine gun. Doesn't really seem like that provide a lot of armor protection.
منكوبة بيوت محروقة جثث بالطرقات السيارات محروقة. هاي اللي خلفته عصابات الجولاني بعد ما دخلت هاي اللي خلفته.
You know, for all the fighting to have stopped, they sure as hell look armed to the teeth.
Yeah, they really do.
Yeah, you know, it's not really adding up, folks. That's what I'm trying to say here.
عصابات الجولاني بعد ما دخلت على محافظة السويدة.
Also, I like how this guy just flagged the cameraman right there. I'd like to point that out. Absolutely aimed that gun straight at his gut. Gotta say, Syrian trigger discipline and also firearm discipline in general is non-existent across the whole country. It's like none of them have ever heard of firearm safety in this country at all. In fact, it seems like they go out of their way to flag each other with the guns while having their finger on the trigger. It's almost like they're trying to see how many people will get the Darwin Award on a daily basis.
دخلت على محافظة السويدة لمدة أقل من
Like he's flagging them again.
3 أيام يومين لحد 3 أيام. هاي يلي قالوا لنا جايين يفكوا
يحفظوا النظام.
You can also see the great Syrian firefighting department out there putting out an apartment block fire with a garden hose.
يفكوا النزاع ما بين الدروز والبدو.
هذول كلاب الجولاني العرصات اخوات المنيوسي هذول كلاب الجولاني.
السويدة منكوبة يا جماعة.
Careful entering that zebra.
السويدة منكوبة. هاي للعالم يلي عم بتابع اخبار السويدة وضع مأساوي يلي بيقدر يتحرك يساعد بفك هي النزاع الحاصل بمدينة السويدة يعمل اي شيء لا يقصر لانه الحقيقة مناظر بتحرق القلب.
انا دواء ما في دواء بشفى بحجر دم. يس
Okay, I don't even know
Just
what
random dudes just walking through the street, just yelling and screaming random shit, and it's like, did they even know what really is going on?
Dude, this guy literally came up to the camera here. He was like, "What are you filming? Go away! You don't have a right to film here." And then this guy comes up from the right. He's like, "I sat there and I went up to the hot dog stand. I like a hot dog with extra relish." Yes, and then just walks off. Look.
Yes.
I don't even understand it. Like,
the way he just walked off like that was just so nonchalant. Like he didn't just go on like a rant and just act like, oh, whatever, I'm just gonna leave.
someone needs to put the Skyrim NPC music over this clip right here. Honestly, I think I don't know if it's copyright free or not. It comes from a video game. Generally, they don't exercise copyrights on that stuff. I would love to play it over this clip though, because this is literally like some sort of a Skyrim NPC interaction that's happening here in the street at the end of this clip. You know, like. It's like they just turn to you and they go, "Hello, stranger. I had a wheel of cheese today." I guess you could say it was cheesy, and then they just walk off right after they say it. It's like I don't even know what the sense of this is. But anyways, moving on from that because we don't really have to make too much sense of it. It's just Syria, and that's all I have to say. Y'all generally get the picture. It's just nonsensical. But we also got to see here in this clip that the Syrian interim government forces did enter the city at some point, but unfortunately that clip won't play. But nevertheless, that is generally most of the footage that we have at the moment from inside of Suwayda. We were able to see the Israeli airstrikes against Syrian Tribal army forces were still happening in the countryside earlier in the day as well, which we can see in this clip. Is of course just like unmitigated chaos, but nevertheless, that's the end of that clip. And moving on from that and on up into Damascus, we also were able to hear that while the U.S. is saying that the region is generally safe if everyone just lay down the arms, the American and French embassies in Syria are calling on their citizens to leave Syria via the land borders immediately. Go anywhere but staying in Syria. Once again, showing the situation is wildly out of control. But still, at the moment, that's everything that we have inside of the Syrian interim government, and it is what it is at this point. Really can't make out more than that, heads nor tails, I suppose. But beyond that, a lot of people have been putting in their opinions right now about the United States and their position on the Israeli airstrikes. And let me bring y'all to that really quickly, because the U.S. has made it incredibly clear that they are critical of the actions of the Israelis. Perhaps I should, yeah, you know what, I'll summarize all this so that way we don't do too much reading. Basically, the United States is saying that the Israelis are crazy and they go around bombing everyone for anything. Literally, the U.S. is saying if someone breeds in the Middle East, the Israelis bomb them, and that they're very unhappy with them, and Netanyahu's a madman, and he's just bombing people for the hell of it because he likes to see people suffer. So what are people thinking about that, Matthew, and what are you thinking about that as well?
All right, so we're getting some behind-the-scenes reporting that apparently out of the White House, the U.S. officials are allegedly angry with Netanyahu over strikes in Syria and calls him an out-of-control lunatic or something to that effect. And do you agree with the United States? So 52% said no, Netanyahu's just defending. He's not acting like a madman. He's just being defending basically his interest. While 27% said yes, Netanyahu is out of control. And 13% said I'm 50-50 on this one. Now, one thing I will say is Netanyahu is a bit trigger happy. I will say that Netanyahu does have a tendency to favor going to conflict over, kind of getting peace. That is a shortcoming of Netanyahu. But at the same time, though, it's unfair to say in this exact circumstance that Netanyahu is going like a madman. He's simply striking the Syrian forces that were trying to attack the Druze people, which are aligned with Israel. So there's no legitimate complaint to be had here, in my opinion, by the United States. Netanyahu's just doing what Israel's always done, which is protect their interests in the region. So, I don't think he's out of control because of this. Now, if you're talking about other things, there may be some arguments to be had on that. But on this specific issue with Syria, I don't think he's out of control at all, personally. But Enforcer, what say you?
I'd have to say that in my personal opinion, I think the Israelis are well within their rights to be conducting the air campaign that they're currently conducting in Syria at the moment. It is quite clear that the Syrian Tribal Army is conducting crimes against humanity, as well as the Syrian interim government. For that reason, I would say that these actions are entirely well within reason. They're not outrageous, and they're not insane. It would be one thing to say that the Israelis were going out of their way to just bomb the Kingdom of Jordan for some reason. If they were doing something like that, the Kingdom of Jordan hasn't been doing much anything. But when they're bombing a group that just went into As Suwayda and just massacred thousands of people, it doesn't really seem like it's too out of the question that the Israelis might be in the right doing something like this, at least in my opinion. And so with that, I hope that does address that the best I can. And also, I saw AF Kaplan say something, and I want to address this really quick because this is a decent point. Someone said, I support Israel, but I'm not a fan of Bibi. And that is fine. Like, that's fine. Like the issue, though, that I have with a lot of people these days, though, is that they don't know how to differentiate the two. You can be in support of a country or of a position without being in support of the individual people who are a part of that. Like, you can support Ukraine, but not like Zelensky. You can be a patriot of the United States without necessarily loving the president. You can also support Israel's interest without being a fan of Netanyahu. It's entirely reasonable to do such a thing. Because I'll be honest with you, a lot of the personal people out there, I would honestly say Zelensky is actually pretty okay. He's not bad at all or questionable like others, but I'm not, like, just to be entirely honest with y'all, I'm not really a particularly big fan of the prior president of the United States or the current president of the United States. I consider both of them, in my personal opinion, to be generally incompetent, just to be straight out honest with y'all. But at the same time, just because I find them to be generally incompetent does not mean I have to become a hater of the United States because I dislike the person who's in the office of the president. I still think the country is great and it has a lot to fight for because I'm a citizen here and I have a lot to fight for myself. This country is all I have. So with that in mind, It's perfectly fine to say I support the Israeli interests, but at the same time, I don't really like Netanyahu. I mean, that's perfectly fine because you don't have to always support the leader of a country as an individual to support the country itself. That's just the honest truth. I don't really know why a lot of people can't differentiate that because, like, for example, in the Army, you don't have to like your commanding officer, but you still have to respect that you have to do your job in the armed forces, much like we have to in our country. You don't have to like the leaders of foreign countries or the leader of our current country. The fact of the matter is, though, is that we've got to still fight and represent our own interests no matter who's in charge, and that's still our responsibility and duty at the end of every day. So I hope that does address that the best I can. And with that, it is time for us to move on into a brief intermission at this moment because it's time for us to start moving back north into Anatolia and generally the Caucasus Mountain region, and then eventually into Western Europe and also the Eastern Front in Ukraine, and also a little bit of news out of the United States. But before we do that, Matthew, I do understand that our fundraiser has been able to reach an amazing, whopping, unbelievable $2,022. We are only a couple of $100 short of the fundraiser goal tonight. And so, Matthew, do we have some top donors, and who are they?
So we do have some top donors of the night. And also a huge shout out to everybody that's already donated to the fundraiser. We are less than $500 away from smashing the goal. And also, by the way, it's been a hell of a challenge tonight to record every single thing. The super chats, the live chats, the Morse code, the normal donations. The spreadsheet is a brand new spreadsheet tonight. I had to come up with a whole new method on the fly to record everything. So jumping into our top donors of the night, we had a $225 donation from AJ, who threw that into the fundraiser. And a huge shout to AJ for the largest donation of the night to our fundraiser of the night. And we also had a 100 from Greg Carrier, as well as a 100 from Old Warrior as well. And then a 100 from Capio Terix, who put in a 100, along with Just Chillin'. Then we had a 100 from The Martian, as well as a 60 from Old Warrior once again, and a 50 from VLKOLAK, as well as a 50 from Insacia, I think, 8, who put in a 50 as well. And those are all of the top donors for the moment. And if I've missed you tonight, and it's possible I might have missed you because the spreadsheet is a complete mess tonight, but thank you all for throwing that in. And if you did get missed, let me know, and I'll give you a shout out in the live chat and also on stream as well. But Enforcer, what say you?
And I got to say a massive shout out to all of our top donors so far and all the folks who we cannot call out at the moment. We are massively appreciative of all of y'all who have supported the fundraiser and have been able to get it up to just a couple of $100 shy of the fundraiser goal in less than an hour. Hopefully, we will be able to hit the fundraiser goal here incredibly soon. We're only about $480 away, and it would be amazing to see the Lee Spring Army hits the fundraiser goal because historically, the Lee Spring Army has never missed a fundraising goal in the history of this channel. And so, hopefully, we'll be able to see that we do hit the fundraiser goal once again tonight. But a huge thanks to everyone who has supported the fundraiser so far, and hopefully, we'll be able to see the Lee Spring Army rallies and brings it right over the top as usual. But a huge thanks and a shout out to all of y'all so much once again. And with that, it is time for us to move on into a couple of questions. Well, actually, I believe that we'll have to be addressing super chats first tonight. This is the first time ever that we've had to do that on a fundraiser night, I believe. But we will be addressing the super chats first, and hopefully we'll be able to get to the live chats really quickly after. But we'll only be getting 3 questions for this segment and then moving right back into the news. So, Matthew, what do we got?
All right, so oddly enough, on our fundraiser night for Sunday, we do have a super chat to address, a few of them actually, and our first one goes to The Martian. He threw in a $100 donation to the channel, and thank you very much, The Martian, for that support as well. He said, it's there, Enforcer, meaning the super chat button, and does this go to Ukraine?
And the answer is no. It goes directly to the channel. Fundraiser donations go to the fundraisers, and you can see that by the Donate Now button. Super chats, through the super chats, go to us and support our channel to help us to keep it running. We try and make sure that that divide's incredibly clear. Even tonight, we want to make it incredibly clear that that divide still exists, because we've always tried to be as transparent as possible about if you put your money into this or that, this is where the money goes. And super chats always go to supporting this channel, pretty much helping us to make sure that we can do this as a living and pay our bills. And all of the other support that y'all throw in through the Donate Now button to the fundraiser, 100% of that goes to the nonprofit in question, which tonight would be Nova Ukraine. So with that, I hope that does address that well. I thank you for the massive support, Martian, and helping this channel to keep the run running, because if it wasn't for folks like you, we wouldn't be able to make this thing possible and keep it running. And also, I saw someone say something interesting in the chat, and this is a bit of a logical fallacy. Someone said, well, if someone keeps getting elected, they must be doing something right. The answer to that's no. Because just because you're elected doesn't mean you're right. And that doesn't mean you're right on everything. Like, you could just qualitatively look at something and go, that doesn't really look right. Like, for example, with the last president, to give a couple of examples, the last president was technically elected by the largest margin that's ever been seen in modern history, from what we generally know. And I would say that his decision to allow the Chinese balloon to fly over the United States was an incredibly poor decision. Even if it looked like there may have been some sort of a collateral on the ground, damage to private property, the Chinese balloon should have been shot down immediately. For example, in the current situation, just because the president wants a ceasefire in Syria does not mean that telling everyone to drop their arms and immediately stop is a good answer. Just because someone is elected doesn't mean that their decisions or actions in foreign policy cannot be questioned and that they're always right, because, like in this instance right here, this clearly isn't going to be the way forward, much like the ceasefire was not the way forward last night. So with that, I hope that addresses that well, but generally, not getting into the domestic political side of everything, but on the foreign policy side, just because someone is the president doesn't mean that every single one of their foreign policy decisions is a masterstroke of genius. Like, you could literally go through every presidency and see something that wasn't really done incredibly well, or was done poorly or terribly, regardless of who the president was, who they were, or what situation they were faced with. So with that, I hope that does address that well. But with that, we are on to the next one.
And our next one here goes to Old Warrior, who puts in a $50 donation. And thank you very much, Old Warrior, as well, for that $50 support. That is a super chat, and we do appreciate that very much. He said, it looks like we can donate to the charity and also do the super chats tonight as well.
And you were actually, I think, the first to throw in a super chat like that, Old Warrior. And that actually shocked me and Matthew when you did that, because we're like, they shouldn't be able to do that tonight. And we were racing to figure out what in the world was going on, and why in the world that happened. But I do thank you incredibly for the support, Old Warrior, and helping this channel to keep running, because folks like you make this thing possible, help us to keep this thing rolling, and help us to keep covering the news day in and day out. And so with that, I hope that does address that incredibly well. And a big thanks to you so much once again for support and helping this channel to keep on running. And with that, we are on to the last question of this segment, and then we're going to be getting on into the rest of the news.
And our last super chat of the segment here goes to Kevin McGill, who puts in a $20 donation. And thank you very much, Kevin, for that 20 as well. He said, does anyone see an issue with almost all of the European NATO countries? Let's see here. Oh, sadly, Kevin, I can't get into this one. While I would like to get into it, it is something that's sadly become political. This migration issue, the illegal migration issue, I'm just going to say it the way it is. It's gotten political, and if we jump into it, it's going to start a crap storm in the live chat. So while I would love to address it, we try to stay apolitical so that way we don't turn off our supporters here that support Western interests and Ukraine and all of our other interests that the U.S. supports. So thank you very much for the super chat. But Enforcer, what say you?
And I thank you for the support. Unfortunately, we wouldn't be able to address that because that is political. But I do thank you for the support and helping this channel keep on running. And I see that there's some debate as to whether what I was saying a second ago was political or not. I generally would say that it's not, because I was trying to cover it in the most balanced way possible, because I'm talking about foreign policy. And as far as we talk on this channel, we don't ever talk about domestic political situations, but on foreign policy matters, there are clearly right and wrong answers on a lot of topics. Very few of them enter a gray area where there could be a right decision or a wrong decision. Generally, the United States has to do what it has to do in each situation, and the answer is incredibly clear. It's just a matter of not whether people are going to make that choice or not. But that's generally what I was trying to speak about there, because just because someone is, just to try and hit it again, just because someone is elected into the office does not mean that every single one of their foreign policy decisions is amazing. That cannot be the case, because there is always the chance that someone could make a decision that's not necessarily inherently in America's interest. Like, for example, with William McKinley in the 1890s, when he implemented massive rolling tariffs on pretty much all foreign goods and sent the United States into the 1893 economic panic, that could generally be considered to be not within America's interest, causing such significant economic turmoil and upheaval. That quite clearly was not a good move in terms of foreign policy. For example, another good instance of a foreign policy move that wasn't necessarily the greatest was supporting the Mujahideen against the Soviet invasion. The Mujahideen would later evolve into the Northern Alliance for the large part, and eventually turn into the Taliban, which supported, sponsored, and funded Osama bin Laden's Al-Qaeda, which conducted attacks against the United States of America. Once again, making it somewhat clear that that action may have not been one of the wisest foreign policy actions that could have been made. Just because someone's elected into an office does not mean that every single one of their foreign policy decisions cannot be questioned or cannot be stated to be the wisest path of action. Because the simple truth is that much like everyone, a leader can be prone to error, and sometimes we can see that those decisions might not be the best even in the short term or especially in the long term, because the long term sorts of situations are very difficult to be able to game out accurately or reliably. But with that, I hope that does address it the best I can, but at the same time, that is not supposed to become a political statement where we speak about specific individuals and what they did wrong. It's simply saying that by us saying that in address to what I was saying a second ago, which was saying that the foreign policy situation in Syria is looking bad and it should not be conducted this way, and that person said, well, obviously it can't be wrong. It can be wrong. Like, that's just a simple answer. But anyways, with that, it is time for us to move on into the next bits of news and on into the Anatolia region and also Ukraine. Sorry, everyone, that I'm a little distracted. I'm having to deal with trying to read multiple things from multiple different screens at the same time, and that gets very taxing sometimes on some nights. But moving on from that and on into the Anatolia region, we were able to hear that multiple countries were meeting inside of Istanbul to speak about the nuclear program inside of Iran. We also were able to hear that a new Turkish missile system is going to be showcased at an arms expo here within the very near future, which we can see right here. But that's the end of that clip, and it does appear to be a new weapon system that's going to be used here in the near future, or at least displayed here in the near future. We also got to hear that the Azerbaijani president has slammed the Russian Federation, as 7 months, according to the Azerbaijani president Ilham Aliyev, he has stated that 7 months after the plane crash, we've received no response from Russian officials. Yet everything is clear, we know what happened, and so do they. Speaking about a plane crash that involved an Azerbaijani aircraft, and the Russian Federation simply swept it under the rug because it was not a Russian aircraft, and did not really speak about it further on the matter. All we ask is simple: take responsibility, punish those involved, and compensate the victims and Azov. Our team found the plane riddled with shrapnel holes. Claiming that a Ukrainian drone was responsible is absurd. The aircraft was hit twice, and Russian airspace wasn't closed until minutes after. Despite repeated letters, Russia says only that the investigation is ongoing. We're now preparing to take the case to international court. It may take years, but justice must be done. Moving on out of that news, however, inside of Azerbaijan and on into Western Europe, we also were able to hear that Germany is planning to buy $5 billion or 5 billion euros worth of Patriot missile systems, according to the one of the party leaders inside of the Bundestag. We also were able to hear that Germany is warning of a major drone attack, as the German general Christian Freuding stated that Russia intends to launch up to 2,000 drones over Ukraine in one night, and according to other statements, it appears that that might be coming within the next few weeks or the next few days, possibly. Moving on from that and on into the state of Ukraine, we have also been able to hear in our location unknowns of a new form of Russian drone launches that are being conducted. As we are able to see here, the Russian army launching Shahed drones from a Dodge Ram that was traveling at high speed. This appears to make it easier to launch these Shahed drones and to be able to make them hit their targets a little bit, or at least give them a little bit more range to hit their targets more successfully.
I don't know where they're getting these from, because, I know they can buy them through third-party countries, but it seems like they're getting their hands on quite a few of these trucks right here. And also, they're getting their hands on some pretty high-end trim levels, too. That's a nice TRX they've got right there in the middle. And they've shown several pictures of that one. They're very proud they got their hands on that, which makes you wonder how they got their hands on it.
Yeah, it really makes you wonder. And moving on from that and into the Russian casualty report, we also were able to hear that according to the casualty reports today, Ms. Disa keeper the records, 270 drones is the 5th highest daily loss, and troops are dropping slightly, but other categories are above average. We were able to hear that over the past 24 hours, 1,040 Russian soldiers were wounded and killed, along with 9 APCs, 121 supply trucks, 3 main battle tanks, 52 artillery pieces, 270 drones, 1 MLRS, and 23 cruise missiles. In general, it was an incredibly good day for the Ukrainian Ukrainian armed forces. Outside of that, and moving on into the front lines near to Kupiansk, we also were able to see Russian drones being hit and destroyed before they could be used against Ukrainian vehicles. These drones actually sit on the middle of the streets waiting for a Ukrainian vehicle to appear and ambush them once they're within range. The Ukrainians appear to be conducting anti-drone efforts to target and destroy these drones on the ground. Outside of that, and further on down towards the area of Vasylivka, we also got to see them hitting further Russian forces that were attempting to attack on the town earlier today, which we can see in this clip right here. And we can see them here targeting and hitting a great deal of Russian vehicles, and once again stopping any Russian offensives that were attempting to take Vasylivka today. Well, you see them hitting some of these vehicles.
Also, Blazing Homie said they also have nonprofits that buy trucks for Ukraine. That's true. There are nonprofits that are dedicated to that, but they're not buying like, Ram TRXs or something crazy like that. They're buying like these small trucks, like these little Mitsubishi used trucks and things like that, that you can get in larger quantities. The Russians are just buying these Rams, I guess, just to show off or something, or just showing that they're using American equipment to try to launch their stuff at Ukraine, because I don't see how they're getting their hands on it. I also don't understand how they're affording that either, because you can't buy those in large quantities for cheap. They're going to be expensive no matter where you buy them.
And moving on from that, we also got to see this Ukrainian MLS Humvee in use today near to the area of the Konstantinivka front as well. We see them prepping the Humvee MLRS to fire. And now we can see them actually firing the MLRS from the back of the Humvee. These Humvee MLRS systems have been in use for an incredibly long time in Ukraine, pretty much since the beginning of the conflict, but are rarely ever used as there's a limited number of them. We believe that there's less than 8 of these in the entirety of the country, and also ammunition is provided sparingly to these systems. Because of that, we hardly ever get to see them used, but their effect is pretty decent when they're actually usable, as you can see in this clip right here. We now see them packing up the MLRS and getting the Humvee ready to move.
Hurry, move, блядь, go.
We actually see that they're ripping out with the door open still, and then they shut it, and they're on the way out. And we can see them here reloading the MLRS system and getting it once again ready to fire. As Nicholas condor throws in a $250 donation.
Oh,
Holy
dang,
moly!
look at that. Impressive.
We are now up to $2,254 on the fundraiser and getting ever so closer to the $2,500 fundraiser goal. Absolutely impressive stuff. And we now see them packing up the Humvee MLRS again as its rockets hit its targets. And that's the end of that clip. And moving on from that and on into our next clip further down the line and into the area of the Zaporizhzhia front, we also were able to see some Ukrainian drone nets being set up near to the area of Irkutsk. These prevent Russian drones from being able to effectively hit and destroy Ukrainian logistics, or at least provides a greater deal of protection to Ukrainian logistics in the rear lines, and is helping out in a pretty strenuous battlefield situation at the moment. We also got to see Ukrainian armed forces clearing out Kamyanske earlier today, directly near to the former Dnieper River Reservoir. That was a part of the Novikakovka Reservoir as an extension. You can actually see where the reservoir was right here, but in the present day, that reservoir is pretty much completely depleted. But here's the clip. We see them firing at the Russian positions inside of Kamyanske and also hitting them with FPV drones.
Oh, look, a fast Russian. He's trying to see if he can do the squirrel trick.
And we can see them continuing to get hit right here. And also, there's some goats or something. But we can then see another Russian attempting to fire at a drone, but he got knocked out as well.
The goats don't call in caddy rubs, man.
Bro, watch out, man. The Kadyrovites see those goats, it's all over. Not for the Ukrainians, for the goats. But that's the end of that clip right there, and that appears to be generally all of the information that we were able to get from the Southern Front earlier today. Nevertheless, outside of that, we have also been able to hear some further news coming on from Odessa, where we were able to see that the Yak-52s are continuing to shoot down Shahed 136s over the skies of Odessa. Outside of that, we also were able to hear some other significant U.S. governmental developments today, as the United States has also been continuing to prepare for support to Ukraine, as Ukraine's parliament will appeal to the U.S. Congress for more weapons, tougher sanctions, and NATO support. The Ukrainians have also asked for Patriots, F-16s, continuous aid, asset seizures, non-recognition of occupation, and backing for NATO membership and post-war recovery, according to statements that were made by Ukrainian media earlier today. We also got to see an updated list by Ian Ellis of the U.S. aircraft carriers that are underway, the ones that are currently sitting in port at home, and the ones that are also under refit as well, showing that there's a decent amount of U.S. carriers out there at work in the world's oceans. But with that, folks, that is actually all of the major news that we have for today. We did not get a speech from President Volodymyr Zelensky today, as it appears that he was apparently busy with work, but that is going to allow us to move on into the second segment of the stream, where we get to talk to each and every single one of y'all. And boy, howdy, is that a fun segment. We get to talk about literally anything and everything, except for religion and politics, and we are absolutely stoked to be able to get into this segment. But really quickly, though, I do have to point out that the fundraiser is still going. We are at $2,330 raised, and we're only about $170 away from the fundraiser goal. So hopefully, the Lee Spring Army will be able to hit that $2,500 fundraising goal, because the Lee Spring Army has never missed a goal so far, so hopefully we'll be able to hit it. But nevertheless, I actually see, Matthew, that we have one last question that you've asked everyone in the poll, and what are people thinking about it, and what are you thinking about it as well?
Okay, so circling back to a very large story we had out of Germany, German officials are now warning that Russia plans to launch 2,000 plus drones in a single night in an upcoming attack on Ukraine. And what are your thoughts? 47% said Ukraine will likely be overwhelmed, while 22% said Ukraine will be able to handle it just fine, and 20% said it's really going to depend on U.S. support. And the German officials seem to be very, very worried about this, as if they believe that Ukraine does not have the ability to ward off that many drones at one time. Now, I'm not entirely sure how many drones on average the Russians fire at the Ukrainian cities, specifically Kyiv. But unfortunately, we have that data on tap, I guess you could say, about what the average drone munitions are that are fired at Ukraine in a single night.
It's about several hundred a night, somewhere roughly around 400 to 300 a night these days. But specifically at Kyiv, it's probably about 100 to 150 possibly.
Okay, so this would be a very much larger magnitude with 2,000 drones in a single night. So we do see that even with these normal average attacks, according to the Enforcer, average about a few hundred drones a night, that there are a couple that do make it through and hit targets inside of Kyiv. So 2,000, that could be a major cause for concern unless U.S. support and U.S. air defense gets there a lot more quickly than previously planned. So I'm actually with the 48%. Ukraine could be overwhelmed with that, and Russia might be planning to do that very soon now that Germany is warning about it directly from their own generals. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say that that Ukrainian air defenses would most likely be overwhelmed if 2,000 drones were fired in a single night. We do not know that the Ukrainians have any kind of ability to counter that sort of a number, so that may actually start to overwhelm Ukrainian air defenses on a nightly basis if such numbers as that were actually achievable. So I would also have to be with the 48%. It seems as though Ukrainian air defenses would be overwhelmed with that kind of a density and number of drones being fired into the country. But with that, I hope that does address that well, at least in my opinion. And with that in mind, folks, we are actually incredibly close to hitting the fundraiser goal. Right now, we are $74 away from the $2,500 fundraising goal. And hopefully, we'll be able to see that we hit it here incredibly soon, because a lot of people have been throwing in heavy-hitting support to the fundraiser still, and are getting us ever closer to that $2,500 fundraising goal. And so, Matthew, please call out the top donors that we've had in between the last segment and this one so far.
We've smashed the goal. Let's go. Igor. We've smashed that goal thanks to the Martian, who just threw in an $80 donation right now. And we are now $26 above the goal, and we have smashed it at 10:30 p.m. our time, Central Time. So very nice, and a huge shout out to everybody once again for helping to make that possible. For a very good charity, which is Nova Ukraine. But Enforcer, what say you?
And absolutely amazing to see. I've got to thank everyone so much once again for being a part of the Lee Spring Army over all these years and continuing to help and support these fundraisers fundraisers that we are running every single Sunday, every single weekend that we've been able to do them. I've got to say that's an absolutely amazing thing to see that everyone's once again been able to band together. And I got to thank all of the folks who we are able to call out and the folks who we are not able to call out for all of the amazing support that y'all continue to throw into these fundraisers so that we can continue to say that the Enforcer channel is supporting Western and American interests in every single way, shape, and form that we can. And so, a massive thanks to you all so much once again. And with that in mind, Matthew, do we have the top donors on the tap right now? Who do we got?
All right, so our top donors since the last time we called them off. We do have a 250 from Nicholas Condor, and that's a massive support right there to the fundraiser, and a huge shout to Nicholas. We also had an 80 that just came in from The Martian, as well as a 70 that came in from Jim ML. And a huge shout to all three of you for that massive support, a very generous support to the fundraiser. And also, I do want to say myself, a huge shout to everybody else that we were unable to call off, because sadly, like we always say, we would be here all night long if we called off every single donation that came into the fundraiser. But we did see all of y'all popping up in the chat, and we appreciate every single one of you that donated money to the fundraiser tonight. We do appreciate that very much. But now, folks, it is time to jump right back into our questions and answer the questions out of the chat, and also our remaining super chat questions. There's just a few super chats left, so we'll hit those first, and then we'll jump right into our live chat questions, because of course on Sunday night you do not throw in super chats to get a question answered. It is just from the live chats. But since YouTube had a little bit of a glitch, we will answer our super chats first. But jumping right back into those, we did have a $10 donation from Wubba. He said, "I see it too."
And I thank you for the support, Wubba, and it's actually a little unfortunate to hear that people are able to super chat tonight, because we always want to make sure that everyone's focusing on the fundraiser. But thank you for supporting the channel nevertheless and helping it to keep running, because even if we're not supposed to be supported today, it is nice that people want to go out of their way to support the channel, because it helps us to keep this thing running on a daily basis. So a huge thanks to you so much once again. I hope that does address that incredibly well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And up next, a big whopping shout out to several donations here that were super chats. We had one from TJ Mini Speeder Phillip, who threw in a 10. We also had a 10 from Azim, as well as a 5 from Gary Bott, and a 5 from Nannerbread, as well as a 2 from Dippin' on This, as well as a 2 from Shannon Newman, who said, "Yep, I found a bug." And you did. And also, Fuquad put in a 2 and said LSA, and Exxon put in a 1 and did not leave a comment. But thank you to all 8 of you for that support, and we do appreciate that very much, even on a Sunday night when there's usually not super chats. We had super chats anyway, but anyways, we do appreciate that nonetheless. And Enforcer, what say you?
And I gotta thank y'all incredibly for y'all's support, because it's amazing to know that y'all continue to support this channel and helping to keep on running, even on a fundraiser tonight. We don't really expect that. We're never actually supposed to have that, but it appears that YouTube has actually ended up creating a loophole of a sort where people actually can support the channel, which is interesting to say the least. But a big thanks to each and every one of y'all for the support and helping this channel to keep on rolling, because even on a Sunday, y'all are helping this channel to keep on running. So big thanks to all of y'all once again. And with that, we are on into the questions at large. So what do we got, Matthew?
All right, so grabbing our Morse code decoders first, we had Paul Schultz, Kevin J, Mason Miami, Joni Dog, Norm Pritchett, Airbug Arbo, her royal fluffiness. They said the LSA Morse code decipher says Ukraine is hitting Moscow just about every single night with nearly no end in sight, and LT LSA.
And that's the sound of money. Y'all hit that dent on the nail, and that was the Morse code message of the night. I got to congratulate the Lee Spring Army Signal Corps for continuing to get that correct time and time again, and to always show everyone that y'all know exactly what the Morse code message says for 1,243 days in a row. So a massive shout out to each and every one of y'all once again, because y'all continue to make the Morse code decipherings a reality. And so with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, so jumping into our live chat questions, we have a lot of really good ones, very thoughtful live chat questions tonight. We're going to jump into our first one, which goes here to none other than Old Warrior, who said Ukraine was testing a laser that was able to shoot drones at about 2 kilometers away. And have you heard anything new about that system?
I have not heard anything new about the Druze, which is the system that is claimed to be the directed energy weapon of the state of Ukraine. We haven't been able to hear anything about that, at least at the moment, rather than from Budanov. It was supposed to be fieldable, and it appears that once again Budanov lied. It's not fieldable, and we don't even know if it'll ever be fielded or in large numbers. So at the moment, we don't have any additional information on the Druze directed energy weapons system. So I hope that does address that the best I can. I do thank you for asking a great question. It's just unfortunately we don't have any additional information or news on that particular weapon system. But with that, we are on to the next one.
And this one goes to Bia Arthur, who said, "Isn't Netanyahu's corruption trial put on hold after the bombings in Syria? And yes, it is actually. It got put on hold the moment that Israel decided to start bombing Syria again, which I still believe was justified because, of course, it was in defense. It was not something offensive; it was defensive. It did get put on hold, by the way, and then now Netanyahu, I believe, might have gotten some food poisoning, so he's going to be resting for 3 more days as well. So it looks like that corruption trial is going to be on hold for a little bit. It looks like. But Enforcer, what say you?
It does appear that that trial will be on hold for all the reasons that Matthew just listed. So with that, we're on to the next one.
And our next one goes to Rhoda, who said, "Do the Syrians have any powerful missiles?"
No. From what we understand, the Syrian interim government and no other faction in Syria currently has possession of any larger short-range or intermediate-range ballistic missiles at the moment, so the answer to that would be no. They generally only have lighter weapons such as gush guns, some APCs, some armored cars, and generally small arms beyond that, including shoulder-fired anti-tank weapons like RPG-7s and others. So I hope that does address that the best I can, and with that, we are on to the next one.
And this one goes to Tiger Metal, who said, "Any new news on China trying to go after Taiwan? Are they going at them again?"
They're just continually making a great deal of propaganda statements like Taiwan will be reunified with China, and also continuing to drill their armed forces in the Eastern Theater Command. But beyond that, we haven't seen any additional news or information that's showing that they're inevitably moving towards a land invasion of the island of Taiwan, at least from what we've seen right now. And so with that, I hope that does address that the best I can, because that is the current situation as we've been seeing it at the moment, and it doesn't really appear that there's any significant change. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And our next one goes to Mr. Glock Glock, who's there, LSA, who's, of course,
Hey!
another channel legend. And he said, "I have a question. What would be the dynamic if the U.S. gave Ukraine the tactical nukes just transferred to the UK airbase?" Oh, my God. That would be a hell of an option right there, wouldn't it? Honestly, just for me personally, I would not be in favor of that. Because with Ukraine in an active war, giving Ukraine a nuclear weapon while they're at war with Russia, that would be probably one of the most horrific decisions the West could probably ever make, because it would cause an escalation that would send the entire world immediately into probably World War III, because Russia would go berserk when they found out they have nukes. So probably not good. I would say that's probably very, very unlikely. But Enforcer, what do you think?
I would have to say that that's next to impossible. We'll never see the U.S. give nuclear weapons to Ukraine. And also, on top of that, that would change the dynamic greatly because, one, the United States would be the first country officially proliferating nuclear weapons anywhere in the world, which would open up the floodworks for everyone else to proliferate nuclear weapons if they wanted to. And also, on top of that, the Ukrainians could be considered a rogue state at that point because now they're nuclear armed and they could do quite literally anything, anywhere. They're operating outside of non-proliferation treaties, and the Russians would also probably start to have a pretty decent defensive stance at that point to start using tactical nuclear weapons against the Ukrainians preemptively even. So I generally would say that it wouldn't be a good idea to give the Ukrainians tactical nuclear weapons for those reasons, but also for the simple fact of the matter that it's not a smart idea to give anyone a nuclear weapon. Nuclear weapons exist, they're a necessary evil in the world, but we want to limit the number of people who have them, and to be entirely honest with you all, I do not trust the Ukrainians with a nuclear weapon. There's no reason to believe that at some point in the future, the Ukrainians may end up having some sort of a situation where maybe a corrupt officer ends up selling off one of those. Like, I'm not saying that the Ukrainian nation is wildly corrupt, but what I am saying is that they are quite corrupt on a comparative scale to any other nuclear armed power. And if we give them nuclear weapons, who's to say what happens to them from beyond that point? It would be hard to assure their safety. And on top of that, if we ever wanted to demand them back, how would we do that? They now have a nuclear weapon to be able to nuke us if we forcibly tried to get them back at some point in the future. So generally, in my opinion, not that great of an idea, at least to me. But with that,
And also on a more realistic, like a more like straightforward front, Ukraine, if they start getting pushed back by the Russians, which it could be possible, there's going to be a push and pull for quite some time in this war, where Russia will take some ground, Ukraine pushes them back, and it's sort of back and forth like that. If the Ukrainians ever were equipped with nuclear weapons and they felt like they were being pushed back too much, that would put the odds of nuclear weapons usage extremely high, because Ukraine might end up launching one at Russia, believing that their sovereignty is at a very critical point. And we don't want to get in that position. Like, we're all for Ukraine being free, but the moment a nuke flies, the world will change forever. Like, that is something that should be avoided at all costs. Even if it comes down to Ukraine maybe losing some more ground, it's better to let Ukraine lose some more ground than to start firing nuclear weapons, because that's like the atomic, terrible option nobody wants to even consider. And the West is doing a perfectly good job by supporting Ukraine with weapons. Now we're finally doing what we should have been doing the entire time by giving Patriots and all these other artillery systems to the Ukrainian military, so that way they can fight the Russians off. So to give a nuke right now would be such a miscalculation by the West that it would probably thrust us into World War III. Whoever made that decision would probably be the sole person responsible for starting the new World War.
Also, I saw some people saying that Ukraine has the abilities to easily make a nuke. That is untrue. They do not have any uranium enrichment facilities, and while they do operate nuclear power plants, and they also have a lot of leading nuclear scientists inside of their country, at the same time, that does not mean that they are able to produce a nuclear weapon. You would have to make a nuclear or more so a uranium enrichment facility in the first place to be able to actually enrich uranium to a 90% weapons grade, which they do not possess. They have to buy their nuclear fuel from other countries like the Russian Federation, the Republic of France, the United Kingdom, or the United States to be able to continue to operate their nuclear reactors. So the simple answer is that they do not have the ability to produce nuclear weapons. Neither should they have the ability to produce nuclear weapons, and I don't think that the United States should ever give them a nuclear weapon. And so with that, I hope honestly, my stance on Ukraine is the same stance I have on Poland or Germany or any other country that's not nuclear armed. They should never have a nuclear weapon, because think about it. If you think right now, like if you're saying right now, well, look at Putin and look at Xi and they have nuclear weapons, that's scary. Imagine how many other Putins or Xis could pop up in any other country, and now every single one of them is nuclear armed. Now you're just not just looking at a small handful of people who might go rogue with a nuclear weapon. Now you're looking at hundreds of them. Literally everyone in the world has at least one nuke, or several nukes at that, and possibly even the range to be able to strike at your country in minutes. So generally not a great idea to give everyone in the world a nuke. That would only serve to destabilize the global situation and not improve it. And so with that, I hope that does address that the best I can, at least in my opinion. But with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, I'm going to let that poll simmer there for a minute. It's the question is, should the U.S. return Ukraine's nuclear weapons? And that's basically the entire question we were just asking right there. So we'll return to that in just a second. But moving on to our next live chat question, this excuse me, this one goes to Bullseye Bob, who said, could Ukraine be trying to probe where Russia's AA in Moscow is with these drone attacks?
I would largely assume not, because it's been generally seen, like you can even geolocate where the air defense towers are. They are in between Zelenograd, Odintsovo, and Podolsk, pretty much in a semicircle, and also Domodovo. And for that reason, it generally is already understood or known what the Russian air defense perimeter around Moscow looks like. So I think what they're doing is just frontal assaults, either to run the Russians down in ammunition, usable ammunition, throughout the whole country, or they're actually attempting to conduct successful attacks and just hoping that a small percent make it through and then hit their targets, and the mission would be successful for that reason alone. That's what I'm generally thinking at the moment, but I hope that does address that the best I can. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And we got a question from Uncle David Other Nephew, and he said, why is Putin readying ballistic mobile forces? Is it for a preemptive action on NATO that may be imminent?
It's possible, but we have a feeling that any sort of an imminent action on NATO would happen within a time after this next year has passed, the next 365 days from now. It may be that he's mobilizing ballistic missile forces to possibly start conducting larger attacks on the state of Ukraine, but an inevitable conflict with NATO, at least in the very near future, would be highly unlikely, especially considering that mobilization would be most likely preceding an attack by only a couple of months, maybe 2 months at best. And so with that, I hope that does address that the best I can. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And we have a question from Alan Deshane. He said, have you boys seen the autonomous underwater drone that Germany has developed? It's called the SG-1 Fathom by Helsing. I haven't seen it personally.
Let's see if we can go pull up this SG-1 Fathom. And it actually looks to be a small, almost like a small patrol. Oh, dagnammit, hang on. Let me see if I can fix this really quickly. It looks to be a small patrol submarine of some kind right there. You can actually see him right there.
That's kind of fascinating. I was thinking it was about to be like a manta ray like copy of that drone that we're developing that's like autonomous, but this looks like a yeah, like a mini sub or something like that. Honestly, I kind of like the manta ray design better, but I'm not sure if they're designed for the same thing. They're both autonomous marine drones, but I'm not sure what they're designed for.
Let's go get that manta ray drone. This thing is just
Oh
incredibly
yeah.
neat.
That is so cool. You know what's wild about this one is the lid was actually blown off this thing, like the first sighting by an accidental Google image right here. In fact, there is the satellite image right there. I'm not sure if it was Google Images. I think it may have been some other satellite firm that actually took the photo, but people spotted it in the dock and they said, "What the hell is that?" And they saw this photo right here of it, and they were like, "That's that secret drone that everybody's been talking about." And that's the first look I think we ever had at it.
Man, you know the Chinese were looking at that and going, "Wow, we've got to copy it." And I bet you they're already
Hell
copying
yeah,
it right now.
I bet.
But anyways, with that, I hope that does address that well. Very interesting drone, by the way. It appears, at least from what I can tell, it probably doesn't have a lot of weaponry on board, if any, and it's most likely used for some sort of surveillance operations at a coastal level. It's not an incredibly big drone. It appears to be quite small because this looks to be on like a small boat trailer. So it's about the size of an average fishing boat here in the United States, like a small, like a single use or individual fishing boat, not like a commercial fishing vessel. And so these are most likely being used for some sort of reconnaissance or surveillance near to a coastal area of Germany, I would assume. But with that, I hope that does address that well. And thank you for sharing that with us. That's actually very interesting. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And real quick, let's jump into that poll question. It's had a time to simmer. So, should the U.S. return Ukraine's nuclear weapons? That's the question. It looks like 57% said no, and 43% said yes. And it's actually a little bit more close than I thought it was going to be. I would say it's not good to proliferate nuclear weapons. I get the fact that the Budapest Memorandum was basically signed and then kind of backed off by the West. But at the same time, though, I still believe it was a good thing that Ukraine gave up their nukes. And here's why. If we went into this conflict right now and Russia decided to invade Ukraine and they had nuclear weapons, we'd be looking at a nuclear conflict. Now, some people might say, well, if Ukraine had nukes, Russia would have never invaded in the first place. But my point, in my opinion, there's no guarantee that that would have been the case. So we could have been looking at a much more dangerous situation right now because, of course, Russia started with Crimea, then they started these border skirmishes in the Donbass and the border regions, and now they're trying to go take the entirety of Ukraine now. So I think they were going to do it anyway, even if they had nukes, and they would have tried to do it a little bit more smart, I guess you could say, than they're doing it right now. But I don't even want to think about that. Like a nuclear war, that's something we should avoid at all costs. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would generally have to say that, in my opinion, the Ukrainians should not have nuclear weapons, and I think it was right to denuclearize the state of Ukraine. A lot of people don't know this, but in the post-Soviet era, no one had the money to maintain the nuclear weapons that they had, and also corruption was extremely rife due to the severe economic situation and the systemic corruption that existed in the Soviet Union. For that reason, those nuclear weapons were going to either be derelict to the point that they were going to be extremely dangerous and prone to some sort of an inevitable explosion, or they would have ended up disappearing and then been used by some sort of a terrorist or proxy force, or nuclear proliferation would have been extreme at that point. For those reasons, it was a smart, wise, and prudent action to denuclearize Ukraine initially, and on top of that, it's not smart to give the Ukrainians a nuclear weapon at this point because we were trying to limit the amount of nuclear weapons that exist in the world. Having nuclear weapons everywhere isn't stopping a war, it's only increasing the chance that when wars happen, it's going to become a nuclear one and be far more devastating than a conventional war could have ever been. And if the state of Ukraine did have nuclear weapons at this point, there's also no guarantee that they would be our friends. If you're nuclear armed, you pretty much get a blank check to be able to do whatever you want and pretty much go about and do anything anywhere. If the Ukrainians had those nuclear weapons, who's to say that they wouldn't have decided that they would have become anti-Western? That could have easily been another approach that the Ukrainians could have taken that no one's thinking about, because they wouldn't have had the pressure of being a non-nuclear power next to a nuclear-armed Russia that was clearly starting to expand westwards again to want to join NATO. Because they're nuclear armed, no one's going to touch them. So they could have easily become anti-Western as easily as they would have become pro-Western at this point. It would have been a much more turbulent sort of a thing to be seen. And so with that, I hope that does address that at least the best I can, in my opinion. And with that, and a huge shout out to James Hughes, who just threw in 150. Holy moly! Absolutely crazy. Damn. Right there. And with that, we are on to the next one.
Yes, and a huge shout out to James Hughes, by the way, for bringing us up to $2,746 raised of the $2,500 goal. And a huge shout out to James as well. We also, let's see here. I want to address this myself. 7C said, L take. Why would Ukraine turn anti-Western? Now, here's the thing, 7Cs. Zelensky right now, he is pro-Western, but Zelensky is just one leader, and Ukraine is a democracy. So when the war is over, or before the war began, the Ukrainians could have elected whoever they wanted, and they can elect whoever they want after Zelensky's time in office is up. So, the way democracies work is if somebody becomes popular that is anti-Western, and enough Ukrainians believe the West didn't do enough to support them, they could decide to go anti-Western. That's a real possibility. And, you don't want to be at the mercy of a foreign country that is nuclear armed that could decide, we don't like the United States so much. We don't like the West that much anymore. We're just going to go on our own path. We're going to team up with China, and we're going to turn against the United States. You don't even want to be in that position. You don't want to even get close to it. So that's why I say it's better to have Ukraine non-nuclear armed. But the catch is, though, since we did tell Ukraine to get rid of their nukes, we should honor the Budapest Memorandum, which says we will defend Ukraine all the way against their threats, which is coming from Russia at this point in time. And I believe we're doing that by giving them all these weapons. We are protecting Ukraine. And now we finally come around full circle to support them 100% yet again right now in the current day. So that's personally what I think. But Enforcer, are you on the same page on that one, or do you have a different opinion?
Yes. Also, I'd have to say, I'm gonna be very honest with everyone. Let's get past all of the propaganda that that's put out there about Ukraine's not just a good country, it's a great country, no corruption or anything. Ukraine has had two political revolutions, pretty much coups, within the past 20 years. They had the Orange Revolution of 2006 and the Revolution of Dignity of 2014. Whether you want to say those were good or bad, those are still government coups that overthrew the current leader. One of them, the Orange Revolution, largely came in and installed, I believe at the time, it was a more pro-Russian leaning president. The Revolution of Dignity in 2014 overthrew the pro-Russian president that was in power then, and then installed a pro-Western president into power, which is what was the catalyst for the annexation of Ukraine and the Donbass by the Russians. With that in mind, one other country in Europe, or what other nuclear-armed country in the world currently has seen coup d'etats that rapidly? I mean, it's not like a Soviet coup, where it's just a quiet one where they go, Khrushchev, you're no longer the leader, we're putting Brezhnev in charge, and he just accepts it and moves on. Or a Chinese coup where it's pretty much conducted through the system of the CCP itself. These were just straight-up coups by military officials and the public to overthrow the government within the past 20 years. That in its own right, while the government is stable now, is showing that the government could easily become unstable in the future. And not only that, if any of y'all pay attention to the internal domestic situation in Ukraine, it's not exactly like they're full of very nice, cheery, great people. I mean, there's great people in Ukraine, and there's a lot of brave, hard-fighting soldiers in the Ukrainian front lines, but at the same time, if y'all ever pay attention, the FSB, well, not the FSB, the SBU in Ukraine is traveling around everywhere in Ukraine, arresting border guards for being bribed to let people cross the border illegally, armed forces officers for selling off weapons and munitions, and coming up with fake soldiers to accept payroll dollars that they take into their own pockets. There's all kinds of corruption going on. So why in the world would we want, one, a country like that is governmentally unstable to have a nuclear weapon, and two, the military is still corrupt enough that we cannot guarantee the safety or safekeeping of those nuclear weapons once they make it into Ukraine? Those are two considerably large issues to go into the concept of nuclearizing a country, and even still, beyond those points, I wouldn't even say that any other NATO country that is extremely stable, like the Polish Republic or the Federal Republic of Germany, should personally be in the possession of nuclear weapons. Our concept in the world that's been a tried and true sort of a strategy so far is to limit the amount of nuclear weapons that each country possesses and to limit the amount of countries in total that have the possession of a nuclear weapon. And so far, that's done pretty good. So I think going the opposite direction of giving everyone a nuclear weapon, or really anyone in a crisis situation a nuclear weapon, is probably going to be resulting in the opposite, which is most likely going to be a higher chance of not only armed conflict but nuclear armed conflict. So I hope that does address that the best I can, at least in my opinion, because Ukraine is not necessarily the primary candidate to give nuclear weaponry at all, in my opinion. I don't really think anyone is, and I think that we should keep to the nuclear non-proliferation treaties. And so with that, we are on to the next one.
And our next question goes to Mr. Solo Dolo, who said, was there any significant damage from the earthquake near Russia?
which earthquake near Russia?
There was a pretty large earthquake. I can't remember. I think it might have been like a magnitude 7 or something. It was pretty large. It was near Russia. It affected Russia, and also it was going to affect Hawaii as well, possibly with a tsunami. But I think that might have happened either this morning or yesterday. I'm not really sure.
Huh, I unfortunately I can't speak to any damage. That actually completely slipped under my radar. So unfortunately, I have to declare ignorance on it. Also, I see some people talking about every system isn't perfect, even the checks and balances in the United States is perfect. But the issue is that we don't have a cultural system in the United States that supports rampant corruption. And a lot of people are not going to get that. Here comes all the political people going, "Oh, there's a lot of corruption." No, there's not. Like inside of the Congress and the office of the president, there's always some existent level of corruption. There's always going to be some prevalent level of corruption somewhere. But it's not corruption that literally permeates the entirety of society down to the bottom. Because I can promise y'all that if y'all get pulled over by a police officer, y'all can't whip out $100 bill and make the speeding ticket disappear, or any other thing for that matter, disappear by paying off a police officer. That sort of systemic corruption does not exist inside the United States. And if it does, it's extremely rare and usually makes national news whenever something like that happens. On the other hand, in Ukraine, corruption, because it's a post-Soviet country, is a pretty rife sort of a situation even right now. Not to say that Ukraine's just so corrupt they cannot be helped, but they still are fighting that corruption to this day, and you can clearly see with what the SBU is doing, that corruption is still prevalent even at the lowest levels, with police officers, border guards, lower level officers such as lieutenants, even sergeants inside the Ukrainian army. That sort of a thing is rife. You don't really see that sort of systemic corruption literally down to the lowest echelons of some sort of a government apparatus in any other Western country, and much less any nuclear-armed country in the world. The Chinese and the Russians are corrupt, but still at that point, the Russians have made sure that if a nuclear weapon it ceases to exist on paper and physically, someone is going to be executed most likely for that sort of a grave offense. And there's also a million different safeguards that they have in place to try and protect the nuclear weaponry. Giving the Ukrainians a nuke outright is pretty much putting another nuclear weapon into the hands of a somewhat more unstable country like the Russians or the Chinese or the North Koreans. And I'm just generally not a fan of giving out nuclear weapons, and I'm not really a fan of giving out nuclear weapons to a country that still has issues with systemic corruption. So with that, I hope that addresses that well, at least the best I can. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right. So moving on to our next one here. Also, I put another poll on Simmer right there. So be sure to answer that one. We'll return to it here in just a second. But jumping back into our live chats, we do have one from Maestro who said, "Did y'all see that commercial plane that almost crashed into that bomber?"
No, I actually didn't. I have to declare ignorance on that. But did you see it, Matthew?
I think I might have heard something about it, but I didn't see any videos of it. Was it in Russia, Maestro? Because I think it might have been in Russia that happened, but I can't recall because I didn't really get all the details on it.
I'd have to say, unfortunately, I have to declare ignorance on it as well again because I'm trying to rate my brain. I just haven't heard or seen anything like that recently. Also, Destiny Edgerton said, "Isn't Zelensky forming a new government?" He is, but the reason why he's doing that is because of the corruption issues. The reason why new governments keep being formed by Zelensky is to keep rotating people out of positions where they could use their power to enrich themselves and to continue the anti-corruption campaigns as best as possible. Because if someone stays in a position for incredibly long in Ukraine, it's pretty likely they may create a network below them that helps them to pretty much run some sort of a corrupt system out of the government's letters of the law and to be able to enrich themselves unduly off of that. That's a bit of the issue at play, and that's why you see that a lot of people who get involved in anything for an incredibly long time are being rotated out at almost regular schedules at this point, is to continue to ensure that there isn't any additional corruption being added on to the existent levels of corruption inside of Ukraine. And also saw someone say that Ukraine ranks about 105 on the corruption scale, which is actually above Brazil, and that's true. But also look at Brazil and tell me, does that look like a upright, upstanding country? I mean, like the corruption in Brazil is pretty crazy on a daily basis in most major cities, really anywhere for that matter. it is rife corruption. And I would say that that a country like Brazil sure as hell also not have should not have a nuclear weapon either. No, honestly, it doesn't even matter how little of corruption you have in your country. No country outside the ones in the non-proliferation treaties should have a nuclear weapon, in my opinion. But with that, we are on to the next one. Also, Mandy, I see that apparently you tracked down the plane story.
Yeah, I sent it to you on Discord. I didn't hear about those. Like, this is totally news to me. I see everybody, including Mr. Glock, telling us that it was a B-52 in Minnesota, or actually North Dakota, actually, according to the article here. This is wild. Apparently, according to an ABC News article, a Delta regional pilot had to make an aggressive maneuver in his plane to avoid a B-52 collision coming out of Minnow, North Dakota. So that is wild. Apparently, they were about to have a head-on collision, at least from the sounds of it. But thanks to the actions of, it appears to be the Delta pilot, they were able to avoid it. So that's insane, honestly. Let's see here. The pilot, this is coming from the ABC News article. It said, given his speed, I don't know how fast they were going, referring to the B-52, but they were going a lot faster than us, and I felt it was the safest thing to do to turn behind it, the pilot said, according to a recording of the conversation. He said, so sorry about the aggressive maneuver. It caught me by surprise. This is not normal at all. I don't know why they didn't give us a heads up, because the Air Force base does have radar. Long story short, it was not fun, but I do apologize for it. Thank you for the understanding. Not a fun day at work. Sounds like the Delta pilot saved the day, actually. A good reason to fly Delta. And I don't know what the hell's going on with that. A B-52 nearly ran almost straight into the plane from the sounds of it.
Man, if that was American Airlines, I think the story would be slightly different. But outside of that,
Oh no, they got good pilots in American, man. The legacy carriers, they've got good pilots. Now the customer service is a little bit sketchy with some of them, but they got competent pilots.
Dude, but with the customer service at American Airlines, you would be like, oh my god, we almost ran a bomber. Shut the hell up and sit down. You don't pay enough, or something like. But beyond that, it is great to hear that they were able to avoid the collision. That sounded like a very close call, and apparently somewhere up in North Dakota. So we just finally heard of the story, but it's a great thing to hear that everyone got out of that unscathed, and only people's nerves were frayed a little bit. And so with that, I hope that does address that the best I can. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And let's jump back into our poll question before we move on here. It's been simmering. It says, how would you describe Ukraine's government? 32% said it's decent but needs large reforms, while 30% said it's good but needs some order, and 22% said excellent and well ordered, and 15% said it's bad and rife with corruption. Now, I would fall in the 32% category. I believe Ukraine's government is decent, but it does need large reforms. And that was the entire reason why Zelensky was elected, because he promised to bring those large reforms. And currently, they're still in progress. So even Zelensky himself acknowledges there is still corruption in Ukraine. That's not up for debate. Even Zelensky says it. He acknowledges it. And Zelensky's trying to get it under control. And also, another reason to get it under control is because for Ukraine to get into, like, for example, the EU and things like that, and have economic partnerships, they have to meet certain corruption criteria, and they have to bring it down to a minimum level. So that's why they're also working on it as well. So it's not propaganda to say the Ukraine government needs some help. Like, it really does need some help, and Zelensky is working on it and making that happen. Even during wartime, he's still trying to make that happen. So I think that's a good sign. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would generally have to say that I would be with the 32% as well. It is a decent government, but it needs a large, very consistent reforms and a great deal of time to implement those reforms. Anti-corruption campaigns are really long and arduous processes, especially in countries that are working on democratic principles like the Ukrainians are working on at the moment. And so for that reason, I would say that they need decent but large reforms as well. The country isn't rife with corruption and unsavable, and I also want to make it a little bit clear for some people who may not know this, but during the latter part of the 1800s, America was pretty much in the same corruption position as Ukraine is in currently, and it was a great deal of anti-corruption campaigns that were taken on by multiple presidents, really on up till about the 1920s, that started to see that a lot of that sort of systemic corruption that existed in the country at every level eventually decreased and then subsided nearly completely. As a matter of fact, the modern day in America is probably the least corrupt that we've ever seen the country so far. And that's going to be to the shock to many a political hack that are going to say, well, what about this guy and that guy who's doing this or doing that? But crazily enough, they're not even close to paling in comparison to the kind of corruption that existed back then. Corruption back then was quite truly so systemic, it went down to the very rank and file sort of people that y'all would run into on a daily basis, like police officers. You could pretty much bribe any police officer in America back then, and you could generally get away with it. Most of them were bribable. You could do all kinds of crazy things back then. You could do stuff back then with the government that would be inconceivable in the modern period. Hell, you could even go without paying taxes back in the earlier part of American history and generally get away with it as long as you knew the right kind of people at the local and state level to pretty much make sure that you didn't exist to the taxman on the state and federal level. You could get away with stuff like that. You can't do that now. And there's a whole bunch of other safeguards in place that have ensured that a lot of the corruption like that is incredibly hard to pull off, and if it is, it's eventually found and dealt with. And that's something that a lot of people don't really know about. There is a huge difference at that level, and Ukraine still has a lot of issues with that. They have a ways to go, but it's not a completely unsalvageable situation. Corruption usually is created by a corrupt and tyrannical government, and considering that Ukraine just came out 30 years ago from being a Soviet republic, and now they're a post-Soviet republic, they are working to get rid of that systemic corruption that was put in place by the communists during the time of the Soviet Union. So I hope that does address that the best I can. And also, let's see, I also, someone said, we've gone from local corruption to national corruption. No. There was a lot of federal corruption back in the day. Loads and loads and loads and loads of it, like an insane amount of it. Like, if you think what's going on in the federal government today is bad, you don't even know. Like have you heard of the Teapot Dome scandal of 1929? That was when the sitting president, Warren G. Harding, let his personal friends go to the Teapot Dome oil reservoir, the oil reserves in Wyoming at Teapot Dome, and literally drain them dry of all of their oil and go privately sell the oil. The government bought that oil through congressional spending bills to be able to build up a strategic fuel reserve for the military. And then he let his friends go out there, literally drain the tanks dry, and go sell the oil for cash. That kind of corruption doesn't exist anywhere anymore in the present day. Like, there's some corruption that kind of skirts around that at some level, but not that rife. There was also other kinds of corruption, like, for example, with FDR. A lot of people may not know this, but FDR was actually kind of having elections rigged in some places, if y'all didn't know. And that's also why he started to win landslide after landslide. And that's also why they went forward in Congress with putting out the 2-term limit on the president as a constitutional amendment, because FDR started to quite truly rig the system to where his party would win every time. Go pull up the Battle of Athens if you don't believe me. It's actually where the citizens of that county picked up arms and fought local and state law enforcement because they rigged the election in 1944 pretty much to where FDR could not lose in that county. And that ended up causing a whole bunch of issues and problems with the local folks. Even the folks who were in support of FDR considered it to be such extreme corruption in the county that they even rose up against the local law enforcement, the sheriffs and things. So, that sort of corruption, it has existed back in the day, and it doesn't exist anymore. Like, those sorts of things do not happen. Like, it may happen in fairy tales, like where people are saying so-and-so is doing this and they're doing that and there's no proof or evidence. But back then, it was a real actionable thing that actually went down to the very most local level from the federal level, if you understand what I'm saying on that. So the concept, and also the concept of there were good old days back in the day, is looking at things through rose-tinted glasses. There was no such thing as the good old days, because if you bring up the good old days to me, I can bring up a whole bunch of things that literally parallel the modern day happening everywhere at every time in every period of history that made them the same old days of today. It's just that people forget that kind of stuff, and then they sit there and think, oh, the good old days, back in the 50s when you get old sody pop. It wasn't like, there was a whole bunch of race riots going on back then, because it was the precursor to the civil rights. It wasn't like all that was happening back then. And it also wasn't like there was a economic recession that came because of the Korean War that happened during the earlier part of the 1950s that a lot of people don't even think about. It wasn't like there was the threat of nuclear war back then, looming over everyone's heads, where everyone thought the Soviet bombers were really going to fly right over the Arctic and start bombing the U.S. It wasn't like there was, the preparation for the Bay of Pigs and a whole bunch of questionable things that Alan Dulles and the CIA was doing to random people they pretty much scoop up off the streets. Stuff like that. People don't think about that that kind of stuff because nobody lived during those times, and you hear about it from people who are trying to propagandize some other part of history and be like, oh, the good old days, you know, back in the 1880s, it was a great dandy time. And I can promise you it was not a great dandy time in the 1880s either. It was never a great dandy time. I'm not trying to be a doomer here, but you just have to find happiness in the times you're in. There's no such thing as, oh, let's revert back to the 60s. It'll be a good time then. I don't know this, if y'all know this either, like, speaking of rabbit holes kind of stuff, but people talk about the riots of today. Oh, look, they're burning down cities. You know, so-and-so's burning down this, or they're doing this, or they beat some guy to death. And it's always a terrible thing when it happens, and everyone acts like it's just happening now. Oh, the country, it's really going downhill today. Oh my goodness, there was a riot, and a couple of buildings got burned down, some places got looted, and some people got beat near to death or to death. Y'all may have not heard of the race riots that were happening in the 50s and 60s, and I'll show y'all one. There's an endless list of them. You can pretty much pull up any major city at the time, and they were happening. But I'll go pull up the Newark race riots because these are probably some of the most famous. But let me go get y'all a couple of pictures of what this looked like back then. So the Newark race riots was pretty much where the tensions boiled over in between the African Americans and the whites living in Newark, and they pretty much just went at it. Like, both sides went at it. The city was being burned to the ground. The National Guard was being called in. Tanks were literally rolling through the streets. The National Guard was armed with live ammunition and was given orders to shoot on sight if necessary. I mean, it was an absolutely horrendous time. Like, if anyone thinks that the riots of today are bad, there has been riots like this throughout most, if not all, of U.S. history. I mean, if it wasn't this, like, skipping back forward a little bit before that, you had the coal miner riots and the literal wars that were happening in the Appalachians because the unions, or largely the people who were trying to unionize, were getting screwed over by the bosses, and the bosses were trying to protect their interests, and the workers were trying to protect theirs, and the army was brought in to literally put those people down. It turned into an actual battle. The army was dropping bombs on these people in the mountains by airplane. And then in the 1880s, in the 1870s, during Reconstruction, there was an endless load of riots here in the South about Reconstruction, and there were some very large ones that happened in New Orleans. Let me go see if I can go type in the New Orleans riots of the 1870s, because I should be able to find an example. Here we go. The New Orleans Massacre of 1866. This happened right after the end of the Civil War, and about 34 to 200 African Americans were killed, and 4 whites were also killed. So pretty much in total, at a minimum, about 40 people ended up getting killed in this massacre, which was pretty much a riot gone violent. And then this also happened several other times in New Orleans history through the decades. You know, and then on top of that, like, a lot of people also don't know this, but New York City, like, because a lot of people say this about New York City. People are like, oh, you know, New York City, it's unsafe these days. It used to be safe. New York City has never been safe. Like, every major city is usually rife with crime. It's a major populated area. Crime runs rampant in places like that. Crime is an endemic issue to cities historically. It's never gone away. Because, let's see here, let me think. If it's the 90s, you've got the Crips and the Bloods, which were really big. And then in the 70s and the 80s, you had pretty much all of the mob wars that were going on throughout the city. And then before that, you still had mob conflict going on in the 60s. And then you also had the race riots to boot in the 60s. And then in the 50s, there was a whole bunch of, well, actually the 50s would be a relatively, somewhat slightly more peaceful time for New York. But then in the 40s, the city was rife with crime during World War II. And then during the 30s, it was the Great Depression. A lot of people were unemployed. Crime was very rife, and the Prohibition existed, so the mafia was truly growing to its peak at that point. And then in the 1920s and 1910s, there was pretty much organized institutional corruption through the city that would end up supporting or propagating violence where cops could be bribed, small little gangs could pop up. You know, it was just hell on earth. The 1900s, like the actual 1900s itself was somewhat relatively peaceful, kind of, sort of. But then if you go through all the 1800s, it's almost a similar story throughout the rest of that century, just in different reasons, ways, and means. But, you know, a lot of people look at things through rose-tinted glasses, and I can tell y'all, combing through history the best I can and reading as much as I can about every situation everywhere on the planet, as much as I can, of course, missing a lot of it, at least for America and most of Europe, the situation has always been the same. It's just people who haven't read history enough that think that it's really bad now and it wasn't this bad back then. Like for example, people talking about, oh, degeneracy. Like this is one that I find interesting. Like people who are like, oh, degeneracy, like these women online who are doing these really questionable things in these websites. Oh, this degeneracy has never existed. I guess they just don't know that up until about the 1950s, brothels were incredibly common in this country and were on almost every city block. It's like, if you call that degeneracy, that sort of degeneracy has existed throughout all of history. Like whether you like it or not, it's the question. And me personally, I'm not really a big fan of that sort of stuff. It brings around seedy people. But it's always existed. It's a constant fight to keep crime, corruption, seedy people, those sorts of things away, or to keep them on the down low. It's something that's always going on because people have always been people. People have never changed. And the only thing that's changed is the kind of clothes that they wear, the kind of music they listen to, and the dialect of English that they speak. But beyond that, it's almost always been the same. But with that, I hope that does address it the best I can. At least from what I can say about that. But with that, we are on to the next one.
All right. So jumping into our next live chat question here, this one goes to Data Relay, who said, "Matt, when the fighting finally stops, what do you think what will be the Russia's personnel casualties?"
It's really hard to say, but I have a feeling that it probably will be over 2 million wounded and killed by then at the current running rate we're going at right now. And so with that, I hope that does address that the best I can. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And this one goes to the Peddling Peddler, who said, "With the amount of high Russian officials taking flights out of windows, what does this have to do with the effectiveness of the Russian war plan, or does it not have anything to do with it?"
I would say it doesn't really have much to do with it. It's more so just trying to maintain governmental stability, but it has no impact on the war itself. It just has more so an impact on whether Putin's government is stable or not. And so I hope that does address that the best I can. And also, I saw Adam McLean say, I must say, though, the cops were a lot more humane back in the good old days. No, absolutely not. Like, that's a really big misunderstanding. Cops did not have a great variety of non-lethal options back then. If you mess with a cop, high chances you're just getting shot. There's no tasers, there's nothing, there's no pepper spray, just the gun. So they had a 38 caliber revolver they carry around that was usually the sort of service issued kind of weapon throughout most of modern US policing history, although the weaponry would change over the 1800s. Generally in the 1900s it was either a 32 caliber or a 38 caliber pistol that they carry around, either a Colt 38 or a Colt 32. That was pretty much the only options. But outside of that, back then, if you whip out a knife on a cop, he's not able to call for backup. He doesn't have a radio. Those weren't really implemented nationwide until probably the 60s or so. So he doesn't have a radio. He can't call for backup. So at this point, he's got to fight for his life. He's whipping out the gun. And he's shooting you. Like, that's just the basic answer. Nothing civil about it. There's no, hey, come on, don't do this. He's like, hell, I'm alone. There's no backup. There's nowhere I can run to hide. I don't have a stab-proof vest. I'm literally just wearing this drippy-looking uniform. I got to shoot this guy to survive. And that's what the cop's going to do because he wants to live. And also I saw some people say billy club, but the billy club though, like if you're going up against someone who might be armed, like nowadays, like with how police work, if you're armed, they're not going to sit there and just shoot you off the bat. They're going to have this whole negotiation. Well, first they're going to call for backup. Then they're going to try and negotiate with you. They're going to try and contain the situation, get people out of the area. It's a very sort of a long and drawn out sort of a situation. Back then, none of that existed. You whip out a knife. He's got a knife. Bam! They're gonna blast you immediately because they can't call for backup. They can't contain the situation. They can't get people away quick enough. There's only one guy there if he's on a beat alone, and if there's a second guy there, well, it's just the two of them against this one guy with a knife, and you're certainly not going to start beating some guy with a billy club who's got a knife or a gun or anything like that, or some guy who's acting crazy and acting like he's going to charge you. You're generally going to shoot him. And back then, officers were given the legal deference because there weren't any body cameras. It was their word against who else's. They generally were given deference that they could do that sort of thing because at the end of the day, they have the same right to protect their own life as any other citizen. Because back then policing was brutal. I mean, like policing up until the modern day has been Very, very brutal. And a lot of people are kind of a little coddled with how the police operate these days because the police were a lot more, if you want to call them cutthroat back then, than they are even today, if you think they are today. So,
Also, do you know how the term Billy Club came around for the baton?
no.
So one version of the story is that technically the like burglars would use that as slang for a crowbar. So like when they were going to burglarize a place, they'd like pull out a crowbar and they'd call it a billy club or a billy bar. That was like way back in like the 1800s. And then there's also some people that said it was really a bully club. That's what it was known as first. But then somehow it turned into billy club. Like either people mispronounced it or just started using the term billy to describe it. And then around the 1850s, law enforcement adopted the term billy club for the baton, and that's how it got its name, was from burglars.
Oh, that's interesting. I actually didn't know that. And let's see. Also, I saw someone say there was no Miranda rights back then. Yeah, there was none of that. I mean, there was none of that at all. Like a lot of the modern legal system and also the law enforcement system that people are used to today did not exist back then. And also a lot of people don't know this, like this is also something that kind of warps people's concept. Back then, if the marshal went out to get you in the Wild West, hell, he's just going to shoot you in the back. There's no taking you alive. He's taking you dead. He's shooting you in the back because if he shows up, he's going to sit there and see the guy and be like, "Yep, that's him. He's a dangerous guy, and I'm alone, and I'm sure as hell not going to try and arrest him. He's probably just going to try and shoot me." So as soon as the guy turns his back and tries to walk away, he just shoots him, kills him, and the story's over. The marshal did his job. He took him in dead or alive. It just happens to be dead every time. That's how it actually worked back then. That's how it generally worked throughout most of history. Like go look at how they did. Let's see, who was it? Machine Gun Kelly and his wife. I mean, they just blasted the guy. They never gave him a chance. Like they were never like, "Hey, come on out. Like let's negotiate. Let's bring in a Bearcat with an armed SWAT team." No, it was just the FBI, a couple of cult monitors, and they were going to town. I mean, they were absolutely going to get these people hell or high water. I mean, hell, if you look at any story back then, every single time they were getting people hell or high water. There's no negotiations, no nothing. It is kill or be killed world of law enforcement back then. So that's sort of how it worked. Like only the nonviolent options would come up with an unarmed drunkard who's acting belligerent, and then maybe they beat him with a club a little bit, or hit him. They had this little thing. It's like this leather strap with like a metal piece in it. They go whack him with that in the head, and that would usually get someone to comply as well. But generally that was used against people who were already known to be unarmed, just some rabble rouser, a drunkard, or someone that they generally know is not extremely violent. But if someone whipped out a knife or a gun, it's on. Like they're not negotiating with you. They're going to whip out their gun and shoot you as well, because that's just how policing worked. But with that, I hope that does address that well. But as far as the good old days go, y'all are pretty much in the good old days today, believe it or not. A lot of people are going to be looking back in 50 or 60 years and going, "Oh, those were good old days. Things were crazy back then, but time was simple." Kind of like how people look at World War II and the post-World War II era as the good old days, although you could come up with a million reasons as to why it was as turbulent a time back then as today is right now. And so with that, we are on to the next one.
All right. So jumping into our next question here, this one is going to go to none other than Philip Southern, who said, "I know the official mascot is the honey badger, one badass animal." And he said, "But what is Alan's official LSA status? And is it Alan or Alan?"
I believe it's Allen with an A and not an E. But Allen is pretty much the unofficial mascot of the LSA, the Marmot. But he's never taken on an official status, although I think Alan the Marmot is more popular at this point than the Honey Badger, at least in popular memory. So I hope that does address it the best I can. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And this one goes to Secret Systems, who said, "My understanding is that the other Druze militias are aligned with Jelani, and it's just the Al-Qamara militia in Al Suwayda. And is it possible that Israel is fomenting unrest to isolate Jelani?" I would say no, absolutely. Israel is not doing that. The Syrian rebels and the Syrian Tribal forces, they just truly hate the Druze people just because. So And once again, I think Jelani's behind it all personally. Jelani is now the de facto government in Syria. He is posing as the government. He's acting like the government. And he's now pretending like he really can't get control of these tribal forces in his own country. So, in my opinion, he takes the fall for it, and the blame falls on Jelani. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would generally have to agree with Matthew on that one, to the point there's not really a lot more to add. So I hope that does address that well. And with that, we are on to the third to last question of the night.
And this one goes to AF Kaplan, who said, if Azerbaijan is invaded by Russia, how long do you think they could resist the invasion?
I think they could probably resist it for a couple of weeks, maybe. Well, actually, a couple of months, because they'd have to get through some pretty arduous mountain ranges to even make it into most of Azerbaijan. So I think they could probably hold out for months without any kind of foreign support. And I don't really know if they could get any foreign support because they're kind of landlocked from any other NATO country like Turkey. But maybe Armenia would jump in and help them out, although they hate them. I'm not really sure. But maybe a couple of months. And so with that, I hope that does address it the best I can. But that's always hard to say because we never know the actual internal situation well enough until something pops off to actually know. So they could last for years, or they might even collapse within hours. It's really hard to say, but I'd assume months. But with that, I hope that does address it the best I can. And we are on to the second to last question of the night.
And this one goes to Data Relay, who asked a question about something we haven't covered all night, actually. He said, Enforcer Matt, should the U.S. use military force on the cartels? And interestingly enough, Data Relay, we're actually already using military force on the cartels, but it's in a very covert way. But right now, the U.S. is more of in a support role with the Mexican government to put down the cartels. So we provide, through our federal agencies, intelligence gathered by the CIA, the DEA, and also, I believe, the FBI as well. We'll send intelligence down to the Mexican Marines and also the Mexican military, and they'll take care of it using our intel. So that's the way it's working right now. And from time to time, I believe some of our federal agents might go down there to assist with the operations, but we're already doing that. And also, we're flying recon flights with Reapers and other drones all the time now. So it's starting to become finally some cooperation with the Mexican government about that issue, and it looks like it's making some headway for now. But the catch is, though, the big holdup with using military force in Mexico every single time is the Mexican government wants their sovereignty respected, and just to send in troops from the U.S. down to Mexico, that causes some tensions with the Mexican government. So that's why we generally just don't do that in the wide open. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say that Matthew probably has a better handle on that situation than I would, because that generally falls outside of the purview of the things that I look at daily. So with that, I hope that has addressed that the best we can. And with that, we are on to the final question of the night. And so who is the last person to throw in the lucky last question of the night?
And this one goes to Uncle Sam, who said, can the Syrians trust the IDF to not take the land south of Damascus? And in my opinion, POTUS needs to influence Saudi Arabia to be the peacekeepers in Syria.
I would say that you can't really trust the Israelis to not take the land south of Damascus, because it seems like security-wise, at least for the Druze people, that would actually be in their interests. I would say, however, that a confederation form of government would probably be the best thing to see inside of Syria, because it would allow for each of these independent regions and cultural groups to largely exercise their own laws and customs while technically being a part of the same country. But at this point, I'd have to say that you can't really bet that the Israelis are not going to be pushing in and taking control of that territory at some point here in the future to try and protect the Druze. I generally would say that a peacekeeping force of multiple Arab countries like Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and others would be beneficial inside of Syria for sure. It could only help. You really couldn't worsen the situation. But I'm not really seeing, at least at the moment, a lot of political support in any of these countries, either inside of the Saudi royal family or the Jordanian royal family, to actually see that would ever happen. So with that, I hope that does address that the best we can, and we've actually reached the end of tonight's stream. I've got to thank you all so much once again for watching. It's been an absolute honor and a pleasure to have you all here. Tonight at the peak, we had 11,000 people here, and 80,000 people have watched this stream before it ended. We've got to thank you all so much once again, and if y'all have enjoyed, please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and if you want to, you can make sure to leave a comment in the comment section below after this becomes a video. But nevertheless, we will see you all on Tuesday at 10 p.m. Eastern Time to cover the next 48 hours of news from around the world. And also, if there is any short word news to be made tomorrow, y'all will be hearing from me. And so with that, good night, good luck, take care, stay safe, Slava Ukraini, long live the Republic, and long live the LSA.
And a huge thanks to everybody once again tonight for donating to the fundraiser and bringing us up to almost $2,835 raised of the $2,500 goal. And we appreciate every single one of you for making that possible. Also, a huge shout out to the 80,000 people that were here by the end of the stream. And we will see you all on Tuesday night at 10 p.m. Eastern and maybe midday tomorrow for a short war video if there is enough news to cover. But with that, thank you all once again. Slava Ukraine, Heroem Slava, get some rest, and good night.